Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. My name is Samuel Martinez. I'm 29 years old, and I grew up in Cedar Ridge, a forgotten town nestled deep in the mountains of northern New Mexico, where time seems to move at its own pace. I left when I was 17 to study in Albuquerque, and since then, I'd only returned a couple of times. The reasons were many: work, studies, pride, and a sharp pang of shame for abandoning my family. But 2 months ago, I received a call that shook everything inside me. My grandmother, Rosa, the woman who raised me after my mother died, was sick and couldn't take care of herself. I didn't think twice. I quit my job at a telemarketing center and took the first Greyhound bus toward the mountains, carrying more guilt than luggage. I arrived on one of those cloudy days that seemed suspended in silence. Low clouds clung to the hills, and the earth smelled of moisture and burning cedar. Cedar Ridge hadn't changed much: the same uneven stone streets, the same skinny dogs wandering through the mist, and the same feeling that everything there was a little closer to death. But there were also the moss-covered rooftops, the aroma of roasted coffee on the porches, and the slow greetings from neighbors loaded with distrust and curiosity. My grandmother lived alone in the same adobe and rusted tin house right at the end of Pine Street. When she saw me, she didn't say much, just touched my face as if she needed to confirm I was real, and her eyes welled up. That night I slept in the porch hammock, listening to the mountain creek with its nocturnal sounds, feeling like a child again. The first few days, I dedicated myself to cleaning the house, organizing grandmother's medications, and helping her get up, dress, and eat. Her illness wasn't clear. She had moments of lucidity mixed with periods of confusion, and she talked a lot about things that didn't make sense. Sometimes she mentioned her friends as if they were still alive. Other times, she told me not to open the door when the white coats came. I thought she was delirious until one morning, while going down to buy tortillas, I ran into Mrs. Peterson, a neighbor who had always been my grandmother's friend. She was standing in front of her house, waving her hands as if shooing away flies, but there weren't any. I asked if she needed anything, and she looked at me with eyes full of fear. "You're Rosa's grandson, right?" she said. "Don't let them in. Tell them they're not sick." I didn't understand anything, but before I could ask, she went into her house and bolted the door. I left with the tortillas in hand and a new unease in my stomach. That night I told my grandmother what happened. She just nodded. They already took Frank and Harold, also Lucy. Everyone said they were fine, but the medical team said they needed checkups. "They haven't come back, son. They haven't come back." I started paying more attention around town. There weren't as many elderly people as before. When I was a kid, the park benches were full of them sitting in the sun, playing dominoes, or just watching life pass by. Now there were only young people, adults, and a silence that weighed more than the altitude. I found out that the medical brigade had arrived for the first time 6 months ago. They came every 2 weeks, stayed 1 or 2 nights, always dressed in white, drove a van with out-of-state plates, and set up a small clinic in the town's health center. Although no one but the elderly were called for checkups, They never gave appointments. They just went to their houses, put them in the van, and took them for complete examinations. And they don't bring them back. I asked Don Peterson, the baker. They say they take them to Albuquerque for studies, but 8 people have gone now, and no one has returned. And no one asks questions. Who would ask? The mayor is more worried about his re-election. And besides, the doctors bring papers, stamps, credentials. They look official. I wasn't convinced. I started taking notes of the names, the dates they had disappeared. I noticed that all the victims were over 70 years old, but without terminal illnesses, and there was something else. They all lived alone or with absent family members. No one seemed to notice a pattern, but I did. Grandmother was getting worse. She talked less, stopped eating well. I couldn't sleep. I spent my time snooping through health center records, discreetly asking other neighbors, making calls to the regional health jurisdiction. All my doubts were answered with evasions. Until one night, knocks at the door woke me up. It was 2 in the morning. Outside, you could hear the motor of a van. I lit the gas lamp and looked out the window. 3 people with face masks and white coats were standing by the entrance. One of them held a folder. Another was talking on the radio. "Good evening, young man. Are you Samuel Martinez?" one said in a firm voice. "We come to examine Mrs. Rosa. We had a report that she shows disorientation and possible severe cognitive deterioration." "Who gave the report?" I asked. "They're routine procedures. All elderly adults must be evaluated periodically. Don't worry, it's for her safety." Something in their way of speaking sounded rehearsed. I looked at my grandmother, who was breathing with difficulty, and decided to lie. "She's not here. I took her to my aunt in another town. She's been in Santa Fe since yesterday." The man with the folder frowned. "We have different information." "Well, then it's wrong. Good night." I closed the door without taking my eyes off the crack. They stayed talking among themselves for a few minutes, then got in the van and left. I spent the rest of the night awake, knife in hand, heart racing. The next morning, I went down to town with one goal: to follow the medical brigade. I asked discreetly, and they told me they had gone toward an abandoned ranch to the south, in the direction of the old road to Espanola. I went on the nephew of Don Peterson's motorcycle without telling anyone. I took the dirt road. It was narrow, full of loose stones, and bordered by thorns. After almost an hour, I saw the white van parked next to a roofless shed covered with weeds. I hid among the bushes and waited. Inside the shed, I could see stretchers, a kind of rusty metal hospital gurney. There were tubes connected to some portable machines. I saw one of the doctors preparing a syringe. Then an elderly woman entered, sedated, dragged by another subject. It took me a while to understand what I was seeing, until I noticed she had intravenous tubes connected to her arm. They were extracting blood from her. But it wasn't just that. In a corner of the shed, there was a plastic box with medical labels. It said human plasma, O-negative 400 ml. There were more than 20 bags. I was paralyzed. They were blood traffickers. I don't know if for the black market, if for private hospitals, or if they simply sold it, but the elderly were being harvested like livestock. I took photos with my cell phone, though my hands were shaking. When I was about to move, I stepped on a branch. One of them turned around. I hid, but I heard shouts. They started looking for me. I ran downhill without looking back, straight to the motorcycle. I barely escaped. That night, I collected my grandmother, and we went to Albuquerque with the help of a cousin. I filed a complaint at the state attorney's office with the photos. At first, they didn't believe me, but when a thread I published on social media went viral, they started investigating. The van was found days later, burned near Espanola. They never found those responsible. Of the group of disappeared, only 3 bodies were recovered, buried in a ravine. The rest are still missing. My grandmother lives with me now. She doesn't talk much, but she smiles more. Sometimes when she drinks her coffee on the patio, she tells me that the silence of the mountain still calls to her. I don't plan to return to Cedar Ridge, though sometimes I dream of the smell of wet earth and stone paths. What I saw there wasn't supernatural. It was worse because it was real, because it was human, because no one wants to believe that in such a humble place, someone could do that to the elderly. But they did it, and they keep doing it in other towns. That's what scares me most. Since I took my grandmother away, the days have passed in an almost monastic routine. I take care of her, feed her, take her to the doctor, a real one, trustworthy. And at night I stay awake longer than I should, going over again and again what happened in Cedar Ridge. It's not easy to leave something like that behind, much less when you feel you barely scratched the surface. After the complaint and the viral coverage of the case, there was some commotion. Reports came out on state television, an investigation file was opened, and they sent a couple of officials to tour the area. But the enthusiasm deflated quickly. Without bodies, without clear culprits, without witnesses willing to talk, everything ended up in that no man's land where inconvenient complaints are lost. A few days after everything exploded, Don Peterson, the baker, called me. He sounded nervous. "They're asking about you, Samuel. People who aren't from here came to the store. 2 guys in a van. They didn't talk like us. They said they were from the attorney's office, but they didn't show anything. They wanted to know where you lived, if you'd come back." I thanked him and hung up. I understood at that moment that although I had left, I hadn't completely gotten out of the problem. I kept searching. I got into forums, contacted civil organizations, even wrote to a journalist from Albuquerque who had covered similar cases. I discovered that what happened in Cedar Ridge wasn't an isolated case. In at least 3 counties in northern New Mexico and 2 others in southern Colorado, similar disappearances were reported. They all had a pattern: isolated elderly adults, medical visits without control, vans with out-of-state plates, and promises of checkups or transfers to hospitals that never materialized. The worst thing was that in many of those towns, people didn't talk out of fear, distrust, resignation. The communities are used to authorities only coming down when they want votes, or when there's no way to hide the blood anymore. A month after leaving Cedar Ridge, I received a package in my mailbox. It had no return address. It was a manila envelope with office paper. Inside were copies of medical transfer sheets with state government logos, but they were incomplete, with blurred stamps, false names. Even so, I recognized some of the names: Frank G., Lucy Peterson, Harold C., the same elderly people who had disappeared. There was also a sheet with GPS coordinates written by hand. I thought about it, turned it over 1,000 times, until one Sunday, with my heart clenched, I rented a car and went to the location. The coordinates took me to a fenced terrain about 2 hours from Albuquerque, between Santa Fe and Las Vegas. It was an arid area of dusty roads and desert scrub. In the distance, I saw a metal warehouse with security cameras at the entrance. It didn't look like a hospital or clinic. It was an industrial facility, camouflaged. I parked far away and approached on foot, hiding among cacti and stone fences. From a nearby ridge with binoculars I bought for that purpose, I observed what I could. Cargo vans entered and left with erased logos. I didn't see patients or doctors, but I did see employees with blue uniforms, warehouse type. One of them, when getting out, lit a cigarette. I could see his wrist. He wore an old hospital medical bracelet. I returned to the city, not knowing what to do with that information. Presenting it to the police was no longer an option. I felt that the closer I got to the truth, the more alone I became. One night while my grandmother slept, I received a call. Private number. "Are you Samuel?" asked a man's voice without recognizable accent. "We know you were in Cedar Ridge and that you went to the property in Santa Fe. Stop looking. You don't understand what you're stepping on." "Who are you?" "Someone who wants to prevent you from ending up like the old people you saved." "What are you doing with them?" Silence. "There are things the government doesn't want to look at, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. You're not a journalist, you're nobody. Go back to your life. Take care of your grandmother. Don't get involved." He hung up. I was left with the phone in my hand, in the darkness, with a dry sensation in my throat. For weeks nothing happened, no calls, no emails, no more packages. I thought maybe they had left me alone, but what really happened was worse. I got used to it. I adapted to the fear, to the silence, to the emptiness. Every time I saw an ambulance on the street, a white coat, a van without logos, I was invaded by distrust. Not because I was paranoid, but because now I knew it was possible. From time to time, they write to me from Cedar Ridge. Most people already found out what happened. Some don't believe me, others thank me. There was a new brigade attempt recently, but this time they were driven out with stones. They didn't try again. My grandmother is stable in health. She doesn't improve much, but at least now she sleeps peacefully. Sometimes, while sunbathing on the roof, she tells me things like, "Do you remember Frank? He never left without his radio. He surely misses it wherever he is." I just nod. Today, almost 5 months have passed since I returned to Cedar Ridge. I don't have steady employment, but I work remotely when I can. I haven't set foot in the mountains again, though in dreams, sometimes, I find myself again on those humid streets, seeing a white van approaching and feeling like everything is about to begin again. I don't know if what I'm telling will serve any purpose. I don't have solid evidence. I don't have backing, just experiences. But if someone reading this has seen something similar, if in their town those doctors with lists and questions have come, don't let them in. Don't open the door. Don't believe them. Because the most dangerous thing isn't what hides in the darkness, but what arrives with a white coat, a confident smile, and the promise of help. And the worst part is that no one is stopping it. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. My name is Jake Thompson. I'm a power line technician for Colorado Electric Cooperative with over 15 years climbing poles, checking transformers, and navigating roads that don't appear on any map. I'm not one to tell stories. much less about weird things. But something that happened to me 2 years ago in the Colorado Rockies near Durango won't let me sleep well. Not me, nor the other guy who went with me, though nobody knows anything about him now. Everything started on a Tuesday at 6:15 in the morning. We were at the CEC base in Silverton, having breakfast burritos with coffee. It was cold, the kind of dry cold that cuts your lips. I remember Pete, the supervisor, called me and Ricky, a new kid who'd only been there 6 months. They assigned us a weird job, a downed line report in an area between Needleton and Hermosa, near a ranch called Ghost Creek Ranch that didn't even appear properly in the system. It was a secondary line that fed barely a couple of houses in those mountains, and according to the log, no one had requested maintenance in over a decade. "There's no signal up there," Pete warned us. "Take the satellite radio and be careful with people. There are hot zones because of the groups, you know." We left in the Nissan 4x4 with the truck bed full of equipment coils, dielectric gloves, poles, fuses. As we climbed, the landscape became thicker, denser pines, oaks, and that fog that seems to stick to the trees. The roads were barely dirt trails. It took us 4 hours to reach a turnoff without signage that, according to Pete's map, led us to Ghost Creek Ranch. "Here," said Ricky, looking at the closed forest. "Here, according to this. Let's see." The road was a packed dirt path surrounded by tall trees. We were going 20 miles per hour. Suddenly, the power line appeared to our left, old cables hanging, held by rotten wooden poles from the 70s. One was down about 50 meters ahead. We parked the truck and started checking. The first thing I noticed was weird. The cables were cut, not broken by wind or natural fall. Cut clean, like with tools. This wasn't brought down by air, I told Ricky, who was already starting to sweat even though the weather was freezing. Vandalism. Who's going to come all the way up here to steal copper? There aren't even roads to escape. We followed the line uphill. About 500 meters away, we reached an old ranch, an adobe house with a tin roof, an empty corral, a rusty windmill. But something immediately caught attention. There was smoke coming from the chimney. "Can't be," Ricky murmured. I approached carefully and knocked on the door. "Good afternoon. CEC. We come about the downed line report." Nothing. I knocked again. After a few seconds, the door opened and a woman appeared. She would be about 45 years old, dressed with a gray shawl, long skirt, hair pulled back in a braid. Her expression was strange, like absent. "Good afternoon. Are you from the electric company?" "Yes, ma'am. We had a report of a downed line around here." "Ah, yes. Please come in." We entered out of courtesy. The house was in semi-darkness, lit only by an oil lamp. There was a lit stove and a boy about 10 years old sitting on a wooden bench, staring fixedly at the floor. There was also an older man in a wheelchair, covered with a blanket up to his neck. He didn't say anything. "How good that you come," said the woman, serving us coffee. "The power went out, when was it?" "About a week ago." I didn't understand anything. There was no radio signal, but the woman was acting like she had called us on her cell phone. "Did you make the report, ma'am?" "Me? No, we don't use phone. There's no signal here." Ricky and I exchanged glances. Something didn't add up. The atmosphere in that house was motionless, as if time hadn't passed. There wasn't any modern device, no television, no light bulbs. Everything seemed stopped in the 70s. "We're going to check the line," I said, looking to get out. "Yes, of course," she replied, but she didn't move. Neither did the boy nor the old man. We walked toward the poles and worked quickly. We raised the fallen section, spliced the cables, and replaced a fuse in a rusty transformer. When we finished, we turned to go back to the truck, but something stopped us. The lights in the house were on. It was impossible. We hadn't reconnected the power yet. We still hadn't energized the circuit. "Did you energize?" I asked Ricky. "No, I haven't connected the disconnect switch." We went back to the house. The door was open, but inside there was no one anymore. Not the woman, not the boy, not the old man. The chimney was out. Everything was covered with dust, tables, chairs, the stove, as if no one had been there in years. I approached the bench where the boy was. On the wood there were marks, not recent ones, but rather old, as if it had been worn down by years of use. The coffee in the cups was dry. It didn't smell like anything. "Jake," Ricky called, trembling, "look at this." He showed me an old black and white photograph hanging on the wall. It was the woman, the boy, and the old man. Behind it said Melcher Family, Ghost Creek Ranch, 1982. This can't be," I said. I felt dizzy. Something wasn't right. We left without saying a word. We ran to the truck, but the battery was dead. We checked everything. It had no reason to be. It was new. We had changed it 2 weeks ago. "Let's walk to the junction. There's signal there," I said. We walked for more than an hour and a half, but the road stretched endlessly. We weren't reaching the junction. We didn't recognize anything. It was like we were walking in circles, even though we were always going downhill. And then we saw another house, small, made of wood. You could hear chickens, someone grinding on a stone mill. It was the same house. "No," Ricky shouted, throwing his backpack. "It can't be." We were back in front of the ranch. Lights off, door ajar. We entered by impulse. There was the boy alone, seated, looking at us. This time his face was swollen, deformed, as if something had left him like that for years. "We shouldn't be here," he said with an old, worn voice. "Neither should you." Ricky ran out. I didn't see him again. I searched for him for hours, shouting his name, going up hills, going down dry streams. Nothing. Just pines, just fog. I walked aimlessly until a CEC security crew found me the next day. They had tracked me through the radio's GPS. They say they found me walking in a circle, dehydrated, delirious. But everything I said was true. We went back with a federal patrol. When we got to Ghost Creek Ranch, there was no house, just empty land with stones. No trace of poles, cables, or transformer. Nothing. They never found Ricky, not in the ravines, not in the rivers. Nothing. I returned to Silverton, turned in the equipment, requested my transfer. Now I work in the city, never again in the mountains. Because there are things up their families that shouldn't still be there. Houses that only exist when you see them. Energy that runs through cables that are no longer connected to anything living. If you're a technician and they send you to an area where no one has lived for years, where no one reports anything, better don't go. Sometimes the CEC receives readings that shouldn't exist, but someone sends them from the other side. After the incident, they put me with a company psychologist. They wanted to make sure I was okay, though we all knew it was more for protocol than genuine concern. They made me sign some papers, nothing formal, but they insisted I not talk about what happened with media or with Ricky's family. They gave me some mandatory rest days. I went to my mother's house in Pueblo. I stayed there in silence, smoking on the patio, watching trucks pass on the highway. My wife and kids live in Denver, and I preferred not to tell them. My boss made me puzzle, tried to distract me. But I only had one image stuck in my head. The boy sitting on that bench with his empty gaze, and voice as dry as if he had been decomposing for years, without moving from the place. Months passed. I returned to work. They assigned me to Pueblo, urban area, everything more controlled. But I never stopped thinking about Ricky. His mother called me, asked if he had suffered, if they had found him. I didn't know what to tell her. No one found him, not a boot, not a cap, nothing. Until one day in late October, something strange arrived at the office. A yellow envelope without return address, without stamp. They left it at the entrance, and it said only for Jake Thompson. Inside was a cheap USB drive and a handwritten note with clumsy letters. "Your partner is with us. Don't try to come back." I felt frozen. I thought it was a sick joke, but I connected the memory to an office computer. There was a single video file, a clip of less than 40 seconds. It had no sound. In the image, you could see a fixed camera, like from a security circuit, showing an adobe room barely lit by an old hanging lamp. There was Ricky, sitting on a bench, exactly in the same posture that the boy had that day. Motionless, stiff, as if he were imitating the scene. On the wall above his head hung a paper with large, crooked letters. "He already belongs." The video ended with the lamp flickering, nothing more. I took the envelope to CEC's physical security. They scanned it, reviewed it. They said it wasn't solid evidence. The date of the video couldn't be verified, nor its origin. They told me it was probably some montage. But the face of one of the engineers when he saw Ricky's face in the video turned pale. He knew it was him. So did I. After that, they didn't let me participate more in the case. They took away my satellite radio, the truck, and sent me indefinitely to administrative tasks. For my mental health, they said. One day I got fed up and went on my own to the area with help of someone I know who lives in Bayfield. I wanted to go back to Ghost Creek Ranch, confirm that everything had been real. I took maps, GPS, even some binoculars. We took an ATV and climbed for 6 hours, crossing dry streams, paths closed by the forest, until finally we reached the site where, according to my calculations, the ranch should be. There was nothing, but something made me stop. Right on the ground, under a big rock, I found a piece of plastic. It was part of a dielectric glove. It had the CFE serial number and 3 letters written with marker, RFA. Ricky always wrote his initials on everything. It wasn't sufficient proof for anyone else. For me, yes. My partner didn't get lost in the mountains. They didn't pick him up. He didn't fall into a ravine. Ricky is still there. Somehow he's trapped, as if that place had absorbed him. As if those people, the woman, the boy, the old man, were part of something that repeats, that feeds on whoever passes by there. And the most terrible thing, everything seems to work with a logic that no one understands, as if electricity itself were a pretext, a hook. Because who else but someone with a CEC uniform would approach such an isolated place? Since then, I've known about other strange reports, technicians who disappear in rural areas, who lose contact, or who are found weeks later wandering without memory. No one talks about it officially. They hide it, but among us field workers, it's already become a rumor. There are places where energy keeps flowing even though there's no source, where there are consumption readings even though the meter was removed years ago. Once in a training in a Lamosa, An old school engineer told me something that still spins in my head. There are sites where high-tension lines don't just carry electricity. They carry other things, things that shouldn't move through there. I don't climb hills anymore. I stayed in the office, writing reports. Every time I review work orders and see reports in areas like Pagosa Springs, Dolars, Mancos, my stomach churns, because I know that sometimes those requests don't come from normal users. They come from places that shouldn't exist anymore. So if someday they send you to repair a line section in the middle of the mountains, and you arrive at a ranch where they say the power went out recently, look carefully at the meter. If it has a cutoff date before the year 2000, turn around and leave. Because if you cross that door, you might not come back. My name is Margaret Coleman. I'm 52 years old, and I've always been strong-willed, like my mother and grandmother, two women who taught me to work from childhood. I was born in Tucson, Arizona, and lived most of my life there, until exhaustion from the city and a series of things I prefer not to talk about pushed me to look for a quieter life. That's how I ended up in Willow Springs, a forgotten little town hanging between dry hills and twisted oaks, 3 hours from Phoenix. I ended up there because of a distant aunt who had died a year earlier. She left me a house with a tin roof and a small construction in front that in its time was a grocery store. Coleman's Corner, the sign still hanging and half eaten by the sun, said. When I arrived, the place looked like the set of an old movie, dusty streets, houses with fallen roofs, skinny chickens loose in the street, and barely 6 or 7 families that still lived there. Most were old folks. The place had something sad, like a sigh that never finishes coming out, but I liked it. There was no noise, no traffic, no one judging me for my age or for not having a husband. I bought some merchandise in Flagstaff cookies, toilet paper, sodas, soap, basic things, and started serving the little store. I didn't sell much, but the neighbors who remained were kind and grateful. Old Pete, a man in his 80s, was my first customer every morning. He always took instant coffee, a roll, and a sugar packet. Things started to change after the 3rd week. It was one of those Wednesdays that smell like dry earth and stagnant time. I was about to close. It was around 8 at night when I heard the sound. A little bell rang, the same one I hung on the door to hear when someone entered. It seemed strange to me because no one was used to coming so late. I came out of the back room and saw a man standing in front of the counter. He was tall, thin as a broomstick, with a black hat and an old denim jacket. I couldn't see his face well because the visor was low. He asked me for a pack of cigarettes, a Coke, and a bag of peanuts. He spoke slowly, as if it was hard for him to get the words out. When he paid me, I noticed that the $100 bill he gave me was wet. I grabbed it with distrust. It smelled strange, not like sweat or normal humidity. It smelled like something thicker, like iron, like the coins you suck by accident. I stared at the bill and noticed it had a dark stain, almost black, in one corner. I looked at him, and the man said nothing. I just felt like he was looking at me from under the shadow of his hat. I gave him his change quickly, and he left without saying goodbye. I stood there for a while with the bill between my fingers. I brought it close to my nose. It was blood, no doubt about it. I thought about reporting it or throwing it away, but something held me back. I don't know if it was curiosity or that little voice you carry inside that sometimes wants to see beyond the normal. I left it in a matchbox and closed the store. I slept badly that night. I dreamed of footsteps outside, of the little bell ringing over and over. The next night, another customer. This time, a young woman with an embroidered blouse and long, messy hair. She asked me for a candle, a package of rice, and a Coke. Like the previous one, she spoke slowly. Like the previous one, she paid with $100 bill stained with blood. "Did you drop something?" I asked, trying to sound friendly. "Everything," she answered without looking at me, and left. On the third night, I couldn't pretend it was coincidence anymore. A boy alone appeared around 9. He couldn't be more than 10 years old. He had very wide eyes and a barely audible voice. He asked me for a box of matches and a bag of gum. When he gave me the money, it was another stained bill. This time fresher, the blood still sticky. By that time, I had no electricity. The power went out every time the wind blew strong, so I was lighting myself with an oil lamp. In the flame, the bill shone red. My stomach started hurting. The boy left, and I didn't see him again. I decided to keep the bills in a coffee jar. I didn't know what to do with them. I started thinking someone was playing a sick joke on me. But who? For what? There were no young people in town, no one with time or energy to invent something like that. During the day, the usual customers kept coming. Old Pete, Mrs. Anderson, even a retired military man who lived at the end of town. All normal, all with clean money. But when night fell, the little bell rang, and those others appeared quiet, pale, always with stained bills, always with strange requests. Matches, alcohol, underwear, empty jars, even once a razor. I didn't know whether to tell someone. The town was distrustful, and I didn't want to end up looking crazy. But one night, while I was trying to fall asleep, someone knocked on the house door. It was 2 in the morning. I got up with my heart pounding hard, took a kitchen knife, and looked out the window. It was old Pete. "Excuse me, Mrs. Coleman, can I talk to you for a moment?" I let him in, and we sat in the kitchen. He looked at me seriously, with that kind of gaze that no longer exists, as if he'd been keeping something for centuries. "You saw them, right?" he asked me. I nodded without saying a word. "You're not crazy. That already happened to my brother. He also put up a little store many years ago. He thought they were bandits, hidden people, who knows. But it's not people who are alive, Mrs. Coleman." "What are you saying, Pete?" "Don't get me wrong. They're not ghosts or those things. It's people trapped. They can't leave. They got stuck in the middle of something. They died in this town. There were ugly things here many years ago, but no one wants to talk about that. The ones who come to your store are the same ones from back then." I didn't believe him or didn't want to believe him, but he told me everything. In the 80s, Willow Springs was a passage for drug traffickers. There was a rural road they used to move without being seen. One night, for some reason, they killed them all. 16 people. No one knew how or who. They just appeared in the plaza, piled up, with their pockets full of money. The army came, took the bodies, and the town slowly emptied. And why do they come to my store? Because you let them in, you take their money, that keeps them here. If you stop accepting the bills, they leave. I didn't know if it was true, but that night when the next customer arrived, a girl with her neck twisted as if they had broken it. I didn't accept her money. "I don't have change," I told her. She looked at me, twisted her mouth as if she wanted to cry or scream, but didn't say anything. She left the products on the counter and went away. The night visits became less frequent. After a week, no one came anymore. I thought everything was over. Then one day I returned from the market in Flagstaff and found the store open. Not forced, just open. And on the counter, a single $500 bill soaked. Not just with blood, there were pieces of flesh on it. The jar where I had kept the bills was empty. Now I know it wasn't a game. It wasn't a hallucination, and it wasn't something that could simply be forgotten. That's why I'm telling this, because maybe you, reader, will someday go through those parts looking for cheap land or a quiet life. And if they offer you an abandoned place, a dusty little store in a dead town, think about it carefully. Some customers, even though they seem real, shouldn't be served. Days passed and the fear didn't go away. On the contrary, I felt it like an invisible lump on my back, following me with every step. I no longer slept well. I stopped opening the store at night. I closed before the sun went down behind the hill, even though that cost me losing sales. I tried to convince myself that someone had entered while I was away, that the $500 bill had been a joke, a bad prank. But who would do that? In Willow Springs, there were no mischievous young people left, no curious ones. Most of those who lived there barely left their houses, much less went around playing games like that. I kept that bill in a plastic bag and put it in a cookie box that I sealed with tape. I buried it behind the house, next to the sink, and marked the place with a stone. It wasn't superstition. I didn't know how to explain it, but something in me said that money shouldn't be loose. A couple of weeks later, a government truck arrived in town. They came with a list and papers. They went house to house asking who had properties in order, who lived there by inheritance or abandonment. When it was my turn, I showed them my aunt's will, the death certificate, everything. The official, a thin man with a tired face, told me they were about to sell some nearby land to a Canadian mining company. Just so you know, ma'am, with that little paper, you can make some good money. I was left thinking. After the scare with the bills and the strange customers, I was no longer sure I wanted to stay. But something stopped me, a strange mix of duty, fear, and pride. It was my place now. I wasn't going to run away like the others. Although, I confess, I did wonder if that company's interest in those lands had something to do with the strange things that happened. I asked the neighbors. No one knew anything about the mining company. Only old Pete told me something that made me think again about the bills. Where they want to excavate was the site of the mass grave. That's where they threw them, in the plain behind the old chapel. My throat closed up. I went back to check the land behind my house, as if I expected to find more bills buried or some sign that I shouldn't continue there. I didn't find anything, but at night I started hearing the sound of the little bell again. The strange thing is that it wasn't hanging. I had taken it down weeks ago. I had it stored in a box along with other things I didn't want to see. And yet I heard it ring, 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 slow each time closer. It was no longer just one visit. It was like they were all coming back at once. They didn't enter, they didn't knock. They just prowled. Sometimes I saw shadows on the other side of the curtain, movements that didn't match the wind. One dawn, I got up courage. I went out with the oil lamp and a machete I had in the storage room. I walked to the store. The light inside was on. I swear by all that's holy that before going to sleep, I had turned it off. When I entered, I found something on the counter that I didn't expect, a list written by hand with names and dates. The sheet was yellowish, like torn from an old notebook. I recognized some surnames: Martinez, Galvin, Rodriguez. They were the surnames that appeared on the abandoned crosses in the town cemetery. Some still lived there, but others, many others, had died in that event of the 80s that Pete mentioned. The strangest thing was that at the bottom of the sheet it said, "Outstanding balance, $8,500. Paid, $3,000. Remaining, $5,500. That froze me. The next morning I went straight to old Pete. I showed him the sheet. He looked at it without surprise, as if he had already seen it before. That list belonged to my brother when he died. They found it on his store table. No one knew who left it. And what does it mean? It's what they owe you, to those who open stores here. They pay with the only thing they have left, what they had on them when they killed them. It's like by selling, they could leave, paying their debt. But they never make it because their souls are tied to the money, not to the land." I looked at him, trying to understand. And if one doesn't accept anymore, they get angry, desperate. But sooner or later they leave, they forget. That's how it happened before. That night someone knocked again. Not on the door, but on the window. A thin, white hand like wax marked the glass with its fingers. It was like they were asking for help or permission. I didn't open. I just turned off the light and curled up in bed, praying something wordless. The next morning there was another bill on the counter, $200, and on the back someone had written, "Almost there." I didn't know if they were talking to me or among themselves. Since then, every week I find one or two bills, sometimes on the table, sometimes between products. No longer stained with blood, but always with that smell of earth and humidity. The account keeps going down. I'm telling this story because I want someone to hear it before it ends. I don't know what's going to happen when the balance reaches zero. Maybe they'll leave forever, or maybe then they'll all come together, not for an errand, but for me. But I'm not leaving, not out of pride or bravery. I stay because here they're paying a debt, and I'm the one who collects, even though I didn't ask for it. So if someday you come through these parts and see a store with an old sign that says Coleman's Corner, don't enter at night. Don't touch the little bell. Don't bring exact change. And above all, if someone offers you an old, wet bill, never take it. You never know who held it before or how many more are left to pay. My name is Robert Castellanos. I've been driving trucks since I was 23, and I'm 56 now. I've traveled the whole country more times than I can count, from border to border. But there's one night, just one stretch of highway, that I haven't been able to forget. Not because I saw something weird or supernatural, no. What happened was human, very human, and that's what weighs the most. Sometimes when I stop at some gas station to grab coffee or stretch my legs, the new guys ask me why I never take the shortcut between Denver and Grand Junction. They laugh when I tell them I won't go through there even if they pay me double. They don't understand, but sometimes when dawn falls heavy and the road gets lonely, I tell them this, my story. It was a Wednesday in November about 4 years ago. I had left Colorado Springs with a load of appliances, final destination Grand Junction. The plan was to go through I-70, loop through Denver, and then take the interstate. But you know how companies are last-minute emergencies. They called me at dawn saying if I didn't deliver the order before 8 in the morning, they'd lose a contract. Of course, they'd pay me a bonus if I arrived on time. That's when I thought of taking a shortcut that a colleague had mentioned once. A route that doesn't appear on GPS, he told me. You save about an hour and a half, just that it's a rural road, pure dirt, and there's almost no signal. But it's quiet. It goes through some ranches between Fairplay and Gunnison. I thought about it a couple of times, but the clock was marking almost 2 in the morning, and I had run out of time to go around. Besides, I had a full tank, good tires, and had slept in Pueblo before leaving. I felt strong. I took the turnoff before reaching Buena Vista, right past an old sign that said Bear Creek, 28 miles. The road started narrow but even, with sagebrush on the sides and closed forest. Little by little, the path got uglier, loose dirt, big stones, and some climbs that forced me to use the engine brake to avoid skidding. But it held up. The truck's lights barely managed to cut through the blackness of the road, and I didn't see a soul for more than an hour. Around 3:20, I passed through a small community without a name anywhere. I saw 2 houses with lights on and a store with closed bars. A dog barked when I passed, and then nothing. Pure silence. The weather was strange, hot and humid, like when it's going to rain, but the sky remained dry. It was on that stretch, leaving the town, where I saw the first truck stopped at the side of the road. An old Dodge with open doors. I thought maybe it belonged to some day laborer, but it was too new for that. I slowed down a bit just as a precaution, and right then I saw the silhouettes. 3 men coming down the hill, dressed in black with backpacks and short rifles hanging from their chests. My stomach flipped. I didn't stop. I accelerated as much as the road allowed me, but it was too late. Ahead, about 300 meters, there was an improvised barricade with barrels and a truck across, and there were others there, armed the same way. They flashed me with a powerful lamp directly at my face. Roll down the window. One of them shouted from the left side. I did it but left the engine running. I had sweaty hands, and my heart was bursting in my chest. "What are you carrying, Chief?" asked the same one. A thin, young guy with a newly grown beard and eyes like 2 dark dots. "Appliances, Frigidaire, screens, fans." He opened the truck door and checked with a flashlight, while 2 others kept me in their sights without moving. One wore a ski mask, the other didn't. I noticed they all carried radios on their shoulders and vests without insignia. They didn't look like simple thieves. After a few seconds, the thin one approached my window again. "We need you to continue, but to the right on that dirt road. You're going to see an open gate. Go through there and keep straight until you reach the edge." And if I don't want to, it came out without thinking. He pointed directly at my face. He didn't say anything. He just waited. So I turned the wheel and entered the road he indicated. It was worse still, with puddles and dry branches. I advanced about 10 minutes until I reached a kind of clearing surrounded by low hills. There were other vehicles there, 2 more trailers, an armored Tacoma, and 3 people in military uniform. My legs were shaking when I got down. One of the uniformed ones approached me. He wore a cap without insignia, a weathered face, and a firm voice. "You're going to help in an undercover operation," he told me without preamble. "We're going to intercept a shipment in an hour. You just have to stay here, and when we tell you, block the exit with your truck." I didn't know what to say or even if they were real military or not. I felt trapped. There was no signal on my cell phone, and even if there had been, who was I going to call? and if they were narcos pretending to be soldiers. They sat me on a tarp under a mesquite tree and gave me a thermos with coffee. 2 other truckers were also there. One was named Pedro and came from Lakewood. The other was from Grand Junction. He didn't say his name. All 3 of us knew we couldn't refuse. Anyone who tried wouldn't leave there. The operation started around 4:20. They got us up in the trucks and gave us instructions by radio. I had to advance to a narrow curve, pretend my engine had broken down, and block the passage. The others would position themselves ahead and behind. When the enemy convoy passed, the military would intercept them. Quick, clean, that's what they said. But it wasn't clean. The convoy coming wasn't 1, it were 3. 2 pickups full of men and an improvised armored truck with fake plates. Someone yelled on the radio. They saw us. They moved ahead and their hell broke loose. The shots started suddenly, dry, brutal, like hammer blows in the night. The shots weren't just coming from the hills. There were snipers hidden, and from the other side of the edge too. I crouched inside the trailer, praying wordlessly. I saw how one of the operation men fell on his back. His helmet flew several meters. The trailer on the other side exploded in flames, and with it, one of the drivers. I screamed his name, but it was useless. Someone yelled on the radio for me to get out of there. I tried to reverse, but the road was narrow, and a tire sank in the mud. They tried to get me out with another truck, but they were already surrounded. I escaped on foot through the prickly pears, crawling as I could. I was lost for more than 5 hours without water or direction, until I found a ranch where they gave me help. After that came the Federals. They interrogated me for hours. They wanted to know if I knew those involved. They told me they couldn't give me details, that it was confidential information. But I saw those men die. I know what happened. The trailer never appeared. The company fired me for non-compliance, and for months I had nightmares with the shots, with the eyes of that thin young man pointing at me in the darkness. Now when someone talks to me about taking shortcuts, I just stay quiet. And if they're around the area between Fairplay and Gunnison, I tell them the same thing. Better take the long way around. There's no hurry worth more than arriving alive. Because there are roads you can pass once, but not everyone comes back. Several months passed before I could drive again. It wasn't fear exactly, but the body no longer responded the same. The nights went by in vigil, waiting for the sound of shots to repeat, or for one of those men I saw fall to appear out of nowhere. There was a time when I thought I was exaggerating, that with some beers and good music I was going to cure myself. But the weight of what I lived doesn't lighten so easily. I tried to find work in other lines, even outside the state, but in every interview there was a point where I ran into questions I didn't want to answer. Why did you leave your last job? What happened with the trailer you were driving? Do you have complaints or records? They had no evidence, but they looked at me as if they knew, as if they suspected something. I realized then that although I had come out walking from that edge between hills and prickly pears, a part of me had stayed buried there. One day in January, they looked for me. They were 2 men dressed as civilians. They didn't identify themselves as police or military, but they showed federal government credentials, those that seem more intimidation than presentation. They met me at a cafe on the free highway to Pueblo, next to a gas station. I accepted out of pure instinct. One of them, dark-skinned with a northern accent, ordered black coffee and didn't try a bite the whole chat. The other barely spoke. "We need you to tell us everything again, without omitting anything," he told me. "What you lived was part of an operation authorized by the Federation, but information was leaked. We think you can help us identify someone." I didn't want to cooperate, not for lack of courage, but because I had already seen what happened when one got between forces that weren't well known. "I was a driver, not a spy," I told them. I told them I didn't remember anything, that everything was very confusing. I lied to them. Of course, I remembered with painful precision the faces, the tones of voice, even the way they carried their weapons. But I had learned something on the mountain that dawn. Sometimes knowing too much is as dangerous as a stray bullet. After that, they stopped looking for me. I went to live with a sister in Greeley, to work in her husband's shop fixing air conditioners and stoves. A simpler world where the worst problem was a part that didn't arrive or a customer who haggled. But the past doesn't bury so easily. A year later, already with the pandemic in retreat, a trucker friend, Eduardo from Arvada, called me. He told me he had found the trailer, just like that, as if nothing. He told me he saw it in a federal impound lot there by Grand Junction. The original paint was no longer there. They had repainted it white, but the old plates were still visible on the rear chassis. And the strangest thing, in the registry, it appeared as confiscated for abandonment in a risk zone. I didn't know whether to thank him for the information or curse him for reopening a wound that had taken months to cover. 2 weeks later, I got up courage and went to the impound lot. I identified myself with a copy of the title of ownership I still kept. The manager looked at me strangely, checked in an old notebook, and let me pass. There it was, more scratched with the dented awning and loose rear doors, but it was my truck. I approached and touched the driver's door. I felt it cold. I didn't know what I expected to find. Maybe an explanation, a clue, but there was nothing. Just old metal and the memory of a night I should never have lived. Before leaving, I approached the guard to ask when they had brought it. "That arrived about 8 months ago," he told me without putting down his cigarette. "They say they found it alone, without trace of the driver or cargo. It was open, empty." I nodded without saying more. The cargo never appeared. Someone picked it up in the confusion, or maybe it was never what they said. Maybe everything was a screen for something bigger. I didn't want to keep thinking about that. Sometimes while I walk through downtown Greeley, I see truckers passing by eating tripe tacos outside the market or cleaning windshields at gas stations. I listen to their stories, their roots, their legends, and I realize that almost no one knows what happens on those hidden roads. There are rural areas between Colorado and New Mexico that don't make the news, that don't appear on maps, but are key in businesses that one can't fully understand. I don't know who organized that operation. I don't know if the men who intercepted me were military, sicarios, or both. What I do know is that I was part of something I didn't understand, and that if I had taken the long route, today I would still be working as before, without this constant anxiety in my body. That's why if you're ever driving through the valley and you come across a rural road that seems shorter, think about it. Ask around, look for references. Because there are routes that seem harmless but are nobody's land. And if you enter, you no longer depend just on the steering wheel or the engine. You depend on who's watching you, even though you don't see them. I lived it, and believe me, there's no shortcut worth what I lost that night. Since I took my grandmother away, The days have passed in an almost monastic routine. I take care of her, feed her, take her to the doctor, a real one, trustworthy. And at night I stay awake longer than I should, going over again and again what happened in Cedar Ridge. It's not easy to leave something like that behind, much less when you feel you barely scratched the surface. One evening, while fixing an old refrigerator in the shop, I got a call from an unknown number. For a second, my blood froze, thinking it might be those federal guys again. But it was a woman's voice, older, with a slight southern accent. "Are you Robert Castellanos, the trucker who was in that incident near Fairplay?" I almost hung up, but something in her tone stopped me. "Who's asking? My name is Linda Morrison. My son Danny was one of the drivers who was with you that night, the one from Grand Junction." My throat went dry. I remembered him, the quiet one who never said his name. "Ma'am, I know what happened to him," she interrupted. "They told me he died in the explosion, but I never believed it. Danny was too smart, too careful. He would have found a way out." I didn't know what to say. I had seen the trailer explode, had screamed his name, but in all the chaos. "Mrs. Morrison, it was very dark, very confusing. I'm sorry for your loss." "That's just it, Mr. Castellanos. 3 months ago, I got a call. Someone breathing heavily, couldn't talk properly, but he said mama the way Danny used to when he was scared. The call lasted maybe 10 seconds, then nothing. I felt a chill run down my spine. Have you told the authorities? Who am I going to tell? The same people who won't give me a straight answer about what my boy was doing there in the first place." She was quiet for a moment, then continued. "I've been asking around, Mr. Castellanos. That wasn't the first time something like this happened in that area. There's a whole network of operations. Sometimes they need truckers, sometimes the truckers don't come back. After that call, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been incredibly lucky. Or maybe unlucky, depending on how you looked at it. Lucky to escape with my life, unlucky to carry the weight of knowing what I couldn't prove. I started having the same nightmare over and over. I'm back on that dirt road, but this time when I try to escape on foot, I keep finding more barricades, more men with guns, stretching endlessly through the Colorado wilderness. The last time I saw anything related to that night was about 6 months ago. I was having breakfast at a truck stop outside Denver when I overheard 2 state troopers talking at the next table. "Another one missing on the back roads near Gunnison," one said. "Third trucker this year. GPS shows them turning off the main highway, then nothing. Drug interdiction gone wrong, that's what they're calling it. But the trucks always turn up eventually, empty, burned out. No cargo, no drivers." I paid my bill and left quickly. But as I walked to my car, I couldn't help thinking, how many other Robert Castellanos are out there? How many drivers get pulled into operations they don't understand, on roads that don't officially exist? I keep Linda Morrison's number in my phone, though I've never called her back. Sometimes I wonder if I should tell her what I really saw that night, that the explosion was so violent, so complete, that I don't think anyone could have survived it. But then I think about that phone call she got, about the way she said, "Mama." And I wonder if some truths are more merciful, left unspoken. These days I stick to city roots. I fix air conditioners and heaters in Greeley, and I don't ask questions when unusual vehicles pass through town. I've learned that sometimes the best thing you can do is keep your head down and your mouth shut. But if you're ever offered a shortcut through the Colorado backcountry, especially if the money's too good to be true, remember this. There are roads where the GPS doesn't work, where your cell phone has no signal, and where the only way out might be on foot through country that doesn't want you to leave. Some shortcuts lead exactly where they're supposed to. Others lead to places you were never meant to see. Choose your route carefully. My name is Ethan Durant. I'm 25 years old, and I'm about to finish my architecture degree at the University of Vermont. For the past couple of years, my passion has focused on colonial architecture, particularly rural constructions that almost no one documents. For my thesis, I decided to look for a little-studied church, one that wouldn't appear in tourist catalogs or conventional archives. That's how I came to St. Lawrence by the River, a remote settlement in the Green Mountains of Vermont, where they said there was a chapel from the 18th century built by Dominican friars on ceremonial Abenaki grounds. It didn't appear on Google Maps or any official heritage list. I had only found vague references in a forgotten article from a university magazine from the 80s. It was perfect. I contacted the town hall of Stowe, and after several calls, they gave me the number of a woman named Mrs. Aliner, who turned out to be in charge of the town council of St. Lawrence. She was the one who allowed me to stay a few days at her house while I did my work. I explained that I only wanted to take measurements, make drawings, and if possible, some photos to complement the architectural survey. She told me there was no problem, but to talk to the other neighbors when I arrived because the church belonged to the town and they didn't want problems. I arrived on a Monday almost at nightfall. The road was a dirt track that became impassable when it rained. Public transportation only went up on Fridays and returned on Sundays. A cargo truck that brought merchandise from Burlington dropped me off. I remember that when I got down with my backpack, my rolled plans, and the tripod. The men from the truck looked at me strangely, as if they knew I was going to do something I shouldn't. St. Lawrence by the River had one main street, paved with cobblestones without asphalt, and a couple of small stores with the basics. Everything was surrounded by hills covered with fog and trees, so tall they seemed to whisper when the wind passed. It was beautiful, but it felt different. I can't explain it well. Mrs. Aliner received me with black coffee, cornbread, and a subtle warning. You just look, son, but don't overdo it. Here the church is respected. At first, I didn't understand what she meant. I told her that of course I was going to be respectful, that I wasn't going to touch anything without permission. She just nodded and showed me the room where I was going to sleep. It had adobe walls, a tin roof, and a small window that faced the field. It seemed perfect to me. The church was about 500 meters from the house, on top of a low hill. I saw it the next day at dawn. I walked with my sketch notebook, a ruler, my cell phone, and a Canon camera that I inherited from my grandfather. From the main street, the solitary tower rose among the trees, with its iron cross rusted and leaning to one side. It was made of volcanic stone, the kind that looks black in the distance. It had no bells, just the openings. The facade was covered with moss and lichen. The door was solid wood without ornaments, with a thick padlock. I stopped to observe it for a while. There was something disproportionate. The windows were poorly located for the style of the period. A cornice seemed finished hastily. I took some notes and a couple of photos from outside. Then a thin man of about 50 approached me with a palm hat and a rolled-up shirt. He told me his name was Matthew and that he was the sacristan. He shook my hand and asked what I was doing. I explained, showing him my notes. His expression changed when he saw the camera. "Look, young man, I'm going to ask you a favor," he said. "Here we don't take photos of the church, neither outside nor inside. We don't make drawings either." I thought it was an exaggeration, so I tried to reason with him. I told him it was for academic purposes, that it wasn't tourism, that I could even donate a copy of my thesis to the community. He lowered his voice. "It's not for that. It's because that church keeps things that shouldn't be repeated, neither on paper nor in image." I was left silent. It seemed absurd to me, a church that couldn't be documented. It was exactly what my thesis needed, a strange story. I thanked him, put away the camera, and asked if I could at least see it inside. Reluctantly, he let me in. Inside it was even stranger. It had no pews, just a floor of packed earth, bare walls, and an improvised altar with candles. Many of them melted on a rectangular stone slab that seemed older than the church itself. There were no saints, just a black cross on the back wall. In the corners, small piles of ash and dry branches, as if someone had made fires or rituals. Matthew watched me the whole time. When we left, he warned me again, "Don't even think about drawing anything. Not here." That night, while I had dinner with Mrs. Aliner, I told her what happened. She just shook her head. "I already told you, boy. Here there were things before. In the Cristero War, people hid in that church, yes, but ugly things also happened. There's talk of a priest who made forced confessions, beat children. Others say that there they buried soldiers alive, and that every time someone draws or portrays that place, something is unleashed. Don't believe me, just don't do it." Obviously, I didn't stop. The next day, when everyone was busy in the cornfield, I went up again, this time with more care. I sat on a stone in front of the church and started drawing the floor plan. I tried to remember the exact proportions of the interior. I used pencil and India ink. It took me hours. While I drew, I felt the atmosphere change. The clouds came down suddenly. It wasn't fog. It was like a thick blanket that wrapped everything. The birds stopped singing. No sound came from the trees. It was as if time had stopped. I returned home and put the drawing in a folder. I didn't tell anyone. That night I heard footsteps outside. I thought it was an animal, but then someone scratched the window. They didn't knock, they scratched with something hard, like a nail or a stone. I didn't open. I stayed still. The next morning, the window had marks 3 vertical lines and 1 horizontal, like a kind of number or sign. I went to the town center. At the little store, a woman asked me if I was okay. "Did you dream anything?" she told me. I said no. Why? "It's just that foreigners, when they don't obey, then they dream of those from the bottom, of those who shouldn't be there anymore." I didn't know what to answer. I went to Mrs. Aliner's house, packed up, and went down to town as soon as I could. I got a baker to take me to Stowe for a modest amount. I left the drawing in the thesis. I included it without explanation. The academic jury didn't ask much, but one of the reviewers told me there was something in that trace that he didn't like. He advised me to remove it, that it could affect me. I didn't do it. That night I dreamed of the church, but not as I saw it. In the dream, it was surrounded by fire. From inside came a voice that repeated my name without emotion, just over and over, as if reading a list. I woke up with my mouth full of dirt. My feet were dirty. There was no dirt in my room. I never knew if I had gone out sleepwalking. I don't think so. I kept that drawing. I have it in a sealed box far away. I don't look at it. I don't repeat it. If someday you hear about St. Lawrence by the river and its church without pews, don't go. Don't try to capture it. That place doesn't want to be remembered. The days following were strange. I returned to Burlington, submitted my thesis with the drawing included, and against all odds, they accepted it without major observations. I graduated. My parents were proud, and my friends congratulated me. No one asked about the drawing specifically, and I didn't give details either. It didn't make sense to tell rational people, architects, and university professors that a lost town in the mountains had forbidden me to draw a church because something was unleashed. The most logical thing was to think I was getting carried away by suggestion. That's what I wanted to believe. I got a temporary job at a construction company making plans and renders for a social housing project in Rutland. I worked a lot, slept little, but there was a sensation that wouldn't go away. Every time I opened the digital file where I had scanned the church drawing, the computer slowed down. The design program crashed. Sometimes the cursor moved by itself, marking diagonal lines where they shouldn't be. I thought it was a software error, so I deleted the file and formatted the disk. But 2 days later, it appeared printed in the office tray among subdivision plans. No one had sent it to print. No one else had access to that folder. I tore it up. I burned it in the back patio. I stayed watching while the paper blackened and shrank. I thought that would be enough. But the next day, when I returned home, I found an exact copy of the same drawing on my desk. This time made by hand. It wasn't my handwriting. It wasn't my ink. And it was signed with 3 initials, FMR. I had to search. I went to the faculty library and then to the Vermont Historical Society archive. They didn't tell me much, but I found a file from 1947. A priest named Father Matthias Rourke disappeared in St. Lawrence by the river during the post-war period. He was suspected of being lynched for abuses against minors. They never found the body. The file said that before that, he had made reforms to the church without permission from the bishop. He built a crypt under the altar. There were no official plans of that work. I started to understand. The stone altar I saw, the marks, the ash in the corners, the erratic proportion of the building. Everything made sense if you thought that what was down there wasn't part of the original design. I called Mrs. Aliner again. I told her I wanted to talk to Matthew, the sacristan. "Can't be done," she told me curtly. Matthew died last month. They found him in the forest, alone, with his eyes open and his fingers broken. I didn't tell her anything else. I just hung up. I thought I was dreaming, that the tension of everything was making me sick. But then, a week later, a package arrived without return address at my house. It was a cardboard box wrapped in craft paper. Inside was a small black wooden cross, like the one I saw in the church, and below, a handwritten note. Some plans are not made to build, but to remember what should not be repeated. No one signed it. I took a photo of it and sent it by WhatsApp to someone I knew at the faculty who studies symbolism and religious architecture. He told me that type of cross was used in certain ancient penitential rituals, especially in areas where the Catholic Church coexisted with non-Christian indigenous practices, that it represented a crossing point between this world and the other side, that placing it on an altar without images could imply that there something was summoned. He asked me where I got it from. I told him from an old job, nothing important, but I didn't sleep well that night. Since then, every time I come across an abandoned or poorly preserved church, I get the urge to check its floor plan out of curiosity. And I don't like doing it anymore because I've noticed something. Sometimes there are details that repeat proportions that don't make logical sense, as if one wanted to induce error, imbalance. And once, in an abandoned temple near Montpelier, I found an altar almost identical to the one in St. Lawrence, same type of stone, same cross, same feeling that it shouldn't be there. The pattern repeats. I don't know if there are more of those churches. I don't know if Father Matthias was one alone or part of something broader. Maybe they were deliberate constructions, like a kind of seal to keep something locked up. And that's why the towns don't allow them to be documented. It's not ignorance, it's precaution. I learned the lesson. I didn't draw it again. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I see that plan again. I see it with lines I didn't make, with symbols I don't understand, and I hear my name like in that dream. If someday you're in the Green Mountains of Vermont, and someone tells you about a church that shouldn't be drawn, listen to them. Plans aren't always for building. Sometimes they're traps, and other times they're maps so that something finds its way back. My name is Samuel Mendez. I'm 36 years old, and for the past 9 years I've been a volunteer paramedic in a small town called Harmony in eastern Tennessee. I didn't become a paramedic out of vocation, but out of necessity. When my mother got sick with lung problems, there was no one to treat her in town. Although she ended up dying from lack of timely care, that day I understood someone had to do something. Since then, I've learned what's necessary to assist highway emergencies, complicated births, snake bites, whatever comes up. Everything here is self-taught with desire and determination, because we barely see EMS folks, and if there's an accident, people don't call 911. They call Samuel. This story I'm going to tell you has had my head in knots for months. It's hard to talk about it, but I need to get it out, even if it's in writing. It started like any other ordinary shift, but ended making me question whether I really want to continue in this. The only highway that connects Harmony with Nashville is Route 40, a road of closed curves, humid hills, and treacherous fog. But we use an old, less monitored section that passes through Willow Creek and connects at mile marker 43 with the new interstate. That stretch is dangerous but shorter and with less traffic. I know it by memory, every curve, every pothole, every fallen tree. Accidents there have never been rare, but for the past 6 months, the calls tripled. Always on the same stretch, between mile markers 41 and 45. Rollovers, head-on collisions, motorcyclists going off cliffs. People in town started saying that stretch was cursed, but I don't believe in curses. I'm one of those who needs proof, something you can touch, something you can see. And I started seeing things. The first one that made me think was an accident at 5 in the morning. A cargo truck coming with coffee from Johnson City, and according to his co-pilot, a huge rock got in their way on the highway. When I went to check, the rock wasn't there. And the strange thing was there were no marks that it had rolled from the hill, as if someone had put it there and then someone else had moved it. I let it pass because one sees so many things that you become cold, but it was the first. 2 weeks later, they called me for a rollover of a white SUV. When I arrived, I saw something I didn't like at all. The vehicle had lost control right after passing a gentle curve, no loose gravel, no oil, nothing. And the driver told me he felt like someone had pointed a direct light at his eyes. He thought it was a motorcycle, but didn't hear an engine. He only saw the flash, and then everything went sideways. The curious thing is there were no headlights or flashlights nearby. I checked in case some crazy person was playing with drones, but nothing. Silence and forest. A few days later, another accident. An entire family, mother, father, 2 children. All injured, though fortunately alive. The dad, barely conscious, grabbed my wrist and told me it wasn't an accident. A black truck cut us off and then disappeared, like they knew where we were going to pass. And that's when I started connecting dots. I keep a notebook where I write down all the cases I handle. I've always done it. I decided to review the last 6 months carefully one night when I couldn't sleep. There was a pattern. All accidents occurred between 4:30 and 6:30 in the morning, or between 6:30 and 8 at night. Always when the light is most dim. And stranger still, many of the victims reported the same thing. A light, a black truck, a rock, a figure that crossed in front of them. I didn't know who to tell. If I went to the police, they'd tell me I was already seeing ghosts. But I decided to talk to Don Ernesto, the owner of the mechanic shop in town. He's fixed several of the crashed cars. He received me one afternoon while changing spark plugs on a Suburban. Look, Samuel, I don't want problems, but yes, I've seen strange things. Cars that arrive with cut brakes, but the owner swears he checked them 2 days before. There are marks on the paint like someone had put spikes on them. People who say they were being followed before reaching the curve. And why don't you say anything? I asked him. Because here no one wants trouble, son. You know how this is. The one who asks questions ends up in a ravine. And that left me more uneasy. I made a decision that might seem stupid, but I felt it was the only way. I decided to do shifts on the stretch from mile marker 41 to 45, from a small hill that overlooks the highway. I took binoculars, a flashlight, my radio, and a thermos with coffee. I set up 2 consecutive nights without seeing anything, pure cold, insects, and owls. But the 3rd night was different. Around 6:45 p.m., I saw what looked like a black truck parked behind some trees without lights. It caught my attention because that stretch has no paths or reason to stop. And there it was, quiet, like hunting. 20 minutes passed, and I heard the engine of a motorcycle. A guy was coming alone, without a helmet, typical of those who use the highway to go sell bananas in the city. Just when he passed near the truck, an intense light came out of nowhere and blinded him. The kid lost balance and went flying into the forest. The truck started as if nothing and got lost among the trees. I ran down, called the Red Cross, but I knew they wouldn't arrive in time. I assisted him myself. The kid was conscious, with a broken leg and dislocated collarbone. When I put him in my truck, the only thing he told me was, "It was on purpose, I know it. They were waiting for me." I decided to record the next night. I took an old camera my cousin lent me. I set it up on the hill and recorded the whole stretch between 6:30 and 8,000. When I reviewed the video the next day, I found something disturbing. The same black truck, same time, same position. This time no one passed, but at one point you see someone get out. You can't distinguish the face, but it's a thin figure with a cap. He walks to the edge of the highway, crouches down, and places something. Then he returns to the truck and disappears. I didn't know what to do with that information. The police weren't going to move a finger without clear evidence. And if it was true what Don Ernesto said, and this was something dangerous, I was already getting in over my head. Even so, I decided to risk it. I went to the traffic station commander in Nashville and took the video. At first, she didn't believe me, but after seeing it 3 times, she told me, "We're going to patrol that area, but I warn you that if this is organized crime stuff, you better step aside." I said yes, but it was too late to back down. A week later, they did an operation on that stretch. They didn't find anything, no truck, no people, no traces. But in those 7 days, there wasn't a single accident. The calm was as strange as the previous chaos. On the 10th day, they called me for a rollover mile marker 43, same as before. But this time, the victim was someone from town, a young man named Stephen, who I'd known since he was a kid. I found him dying among the metal of his car with an open chest wound. When I was assisting him, the last thing he told me was, "I saw them. There are 3 of them. They come every night and record everything." They were recording there. That's when it hit me. It wasn't revenge or craziness. It was content. People who caused accidents just to record them, and then who knows what they did with those videos. I haven't seen the black truck again since the traffic folks patrolled. They disappeared, but something tells me they didn't leave. They just moved, and they'll keep doing it because no one looks for them, and because what they do sells. I keep working as a paramedic, but I'm not the same anymore. I drive with fear. Every time someone mentions a strange light in the curve, I feel like this didn't end, and that sooner or later they're going to look for me because I was the one who started talking. Since Stephen's death, something changed in me. That kid's face as he looked at me while I pressed gauze to his chest until his gaze went away won't let me sleep. His phrase keeps buzzing in my head like a fly. They come every night and record everything. A week passed without incidents, as if someone had warned them they were being watched. But on April 10th at 6 in the morning, they woke me with knocks on the door. It was Isura, Don Miguel's daughter, crying breathlessly. A car went off the cliff, there by the curve where Stephen died. I got dressed without thinking, grabbed the emergency backpack and my radio, and went flying in the truck. When I arrived, I recognized the car from a distance. A red Aveo upside down among the bushes, with the engine still warm. I went down among thorns and branches, sliding as I could. Inside, the driver, a young man with a supermarket uniform, was alive but unconscious. I got his wallet to look for identification. His name was Carlos A., and he worked at the Walmart in Nashville. When I got him out, something caught my attention, a detail. He had a small transmitter stuck with black tape under the seat. It wasn't from the car. It was a type of microphone like those used for undercover recordings. I kept it. After the transfer to the hospital, I went to sit on the hill where I used to do surveillance. I took the microphone out of my pocket, and although I didn't fully understand what type it was, something told me it wasn't casual. I went with Marlon, a friend from high school who studied telecommunications engineering and now works with antennas for a community broadcaster. He saw it, his face darkened, and he told me, "This is a lavalier digital microphone. It transmits in real time to a closed frequency. It's not for commercial use. This is from someone who knows what they're doing or what they want to record." I asked if he could track where it transmitted to. He told me it wasn't so simple, that he needed equipment, but there was a possibility if I got one more in operation. I went back to the accident site. It was late, but I couldn't wait. I checked the car well while they still had it in the police lot. Under the dashboard, I found a small support with an empty space where evidently another device went. Something told me they removed it before I arrived, and it wasn't the police. It was whoever was attentive to each of these accidents, who put the lights, the rocks, the false signals, and then returned to clean up. Weeks passed without being able to sleep. I became obsessed. I went out every afternoon in the truck, driving slowly between mile marker 40 and 45, waiting to see something out of place. I stopped to talk to farmers, truckers, even a couple of migrants who slept under a rock around there. One of them told me something that froze me. Up there on that hill, and he pointed to a clearing where there was no visible road, there's a little cabin with antennas. Black cars arrive without plates, only at night. There was no construction visible from the highway, and the access was pure forest, but he insisted. So one night I took a high-power lamp machete and my backpack. I climbed on a barely visible path, stepping on wet branches and trying not to make noise. It took me almost an hour to climb. What I found was an improvised construction wood, tin, camouflaged with dry branches. On the roof, 3 small antennas and a security camera pointing down. Inside, lights off, a table, cables, and 2 screens. No one was there, no cars. But the most impactful thing, an entire wall covered with photographs and maps. Accidents marked with pins, dates, names, and screens showing recordings. They were real. They recorded every accident from different angles. Some images were so clear you could see the victims' faces seconds before impact. I didn't stay more than 10 minutes. I took photos with my cell phone, saved them on an external memory, and went down without turning on the lamp. I didn't know if someone had seen me. That night, I didn't go home. I slept at my aunt's house in another district. The next day, I went to a lawyer who had worked with human rights, Arturo Ramirez. I told him everything. At first, he thought I was exaggerating. I showed him the photos. His face changed. "This is serious, Samuel. If what you say is true, this isn't just illegal, it's criminal. But it's also very organized. No one takes so much trouble to record accidents unless there's a lot of money involved. This could be a clandestine content network." He explained that there's a hidden market on the internet where people pay to see extreme content robberies, aggressions, and yes, even real accidents. If that was what was happening, those responsible were probably very protected. "Don't report it at the local command," he warned me. "Do it at the Specialized Prosecutor's Office for Technological Crimes in Nashville, but don't go alone." I didn't go. I sent the images with an anonymous complaint. Weeks later, the place disappeared. I climbed again. The cabin was no longer there. Neither were the antennas. No trace. Only marks of heavy tires and fresh ashes. They burned everything. Since then, the highway has been calm, but I don't trust that calm, because the accidents weren't casual. They were produced. Someone behind screens decided who was going to live and who was going to crash. And when they felt the pressure, they simply moved. Today, I keep being a paramedic. I keep picking up wounded, no longer with so much innocence. I have cameras in my truck, hidden ones. Every time someone mentions a light or a truck without plates, I write it down, because I know they'll come back. Here or on another curve, in another town where no one asks questions, where the dead have no voice. And although they've warned me to leave this alone, not to get involved, I can't. Because no one else is going to tell it. And because, in one of those recordings I managed to see in that cabin, I appeared helping Stephen, with my name written under the video. They already knew who I was, and I still don't know why they haven't looked for me. But I know they will. My name is Luis Martinez, and what I'm about to tell you happened to us last January during the coldest part of winter up in the Colorado Rockies, near Breckenridge. It was the first time my friends and I had rented a cabin so isolated, so deep in the wilderness. The idea was to disconnect completely. Spend a few days without social media, work emails, or city noise. Just us, the mountains, and silence. There were 5 of us, my girlfriend Sophie, my buddy Jake with his girl Amanda, and my younger brother Julio. Jake also brought his dog, Rex, a well-trained Belgian shepherd, the kind that doesn't spook easily. We found the cabin on some sketchy rental website that, looking back, wasn't very reliable at all. They posted it with only 3 blurry photos, but what convinced us was the price. Dirt cheap, supposedly with a fireplace, solar panel, clean water, and enough firewood for several days. No Wi-Fi, no cell signal, exactly what we were looking for. When we arrived, after a slow climb up a gravel road full of loose rocks, the first thing that struck us was how isolated it was. No neighbors, no other cabins, no marked trails, just a clearing among the pines, a dark wooden structure, and cold that cut through to your bones even though it was barely 5 in the afternoon. The caretaker left us the keys and gave us some recommendations that I should have taken more seriously. "Don't leave the marked trail," he said without a hint of humor. "There are hidden pits covered by brush, and don't wander off at night even if you think you know the terrain." He also insisted we lock the windows tight at nightfall, and that if we heard noises among the trees, we shouldn't go out to investigate. I took it as folklore, part of the rustic charm. Jake, on the other hand, seemed uncomfortable from the start. The first day was peaceful. We built a fire, grilled some meat, and drank beer while watching the clear sky like a mirror. Rex ran among the trees like it was his home. Nothing strange happened until the early hours. I was the first to hear it, a light, repetitive tapping, like someone knocking on wood. I got up from my sleeping bag and saw it was coming from the kitchen area. I walked carefully, nothing. But when I looked out the window, I noticed something odd. A figure was moving among the pines about 100 feet away. It was tall, didn't use a flashlight, made no sound walking, just moved slowly as if searching for something on the ground. I didn't say anything. I thought it might be a hiker, maybe a hunter. I didn't want to worry the others. The next morning when we woke up, we noticed Rex was gone. Jake called for him several times, but nothing. He whistled, walked down the trail that leads to the river. We searched for 2 hours until our fingers froze. No trace, no tracks, no barking, nothing. "This isn't normal," Jake said, worried. "Rex always comes back. Even when he wanders off, he never gets lost." We thought he'd return on his own. Maybe he'd gone off following some animal. That night we ate little. The atmosphere was strange. It wasn't fear yet. It was more like the mountain was testing us, like someone was measuring us from a distance. The second night we heard footsteps. Not animals, human. Amanda was the one who looked out the window this time. I saw her face go white with fright. She just said, "There's someone standing out there." We all ran over, turned off the lights. Jake grabbed a knife. I took a log from the fireplace. Sophie locked the door. We looked out the window. There was a figure right at the edge of the clearing among the pines. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stared toward the cabin. Then it left. It didn't run or shout, just turned around and walked into the trees, as if it had already done what it came to do. That night we slept in shifts. At dawn we went out carefully. The clearing was covered with dry leaves, and that's where we saw it, a backpack thrown near the trunk of a pine. It wasn't any of ours. It was old, dusty, with torn fabric on one edge. Jake opened it with a stick without touching it directly. Inside was men's clothing, a water-damaged notebook, and a torn ID. Name, Carlos Rivera. Date of birth, 1989. Sophie looked him up on her phone once we got signal halfway down the road. Nothing came up on Google. But when checking through the cabin's GPS files, because the place had an old tablet with offline maps, we found a folder marked Reports. Inside were 4 unnamed PDFs. We opened them. They were missing person reports. Different dates, different years, but all young men. 3 backpackers, a couple of trail runners, a bird photographer. All had rented that same cabin. Nothing more was ever heard from them. We wanted to leave that same day, but Jake's truck wouldn't start. The battery had died. Nobody understood why. It was fine the afternoon before. We were trapped. We spent the afternoon trying to charge it with a panel we'd brought, with no success. By the time the sun went down, fear was evident. We locked everything, piled furniture against the door, slept together in the living room. Then almost at midnight, they knocked on the window. 1, 2, 3 times. Slow, deliberate knocks. Jake, with knife in hand, crawled to the window. He looked, stayed still. "It's not the same one from yesterday," he whispered. "It's another one, and there are more behind." We peered through the crack in the curtain. There were 3 figures this time. 1 in front, 2 more among the trees, barely visible. They didn't do anything, just stood there as if waiting for something. One of them wore a blue jacket, identical to the one we'd seen in the photo of one of the missing people from the files. The youngest one. They didn't move for hours. Only at dawn did they leave. The truck started the next day just like that, for no reason, as if they had let us leave. As if we had passed some test. We left without saying a word, went down the trail at full speed. We reached the first town and went straight to the police station. We told them everything. The officer on duty just listened with an annoyed expression. He said, "That cabin has been reported before, but it's not in our records. It's private property, but nobody responds, not the county or the state. We don't send patrols up there anymore. And the people who disappeared, silence. Nobody wanted to talk anymore. Since then, we haven't rented anything outside the city, no mountains, no forests, no eco cabins. Everyone returned to their lives. Rex never appeared. Jake moved in with his family in Denver. Sophie and I stopped talking about it. We didn't overcome it, we just covered it with routine. But sometimes when I check social media or cabin rental pages, it appears again, the same offer. Rustic cabin in Breckenridge. No signal, total privacy. Adults only. Minimum 2-night rental. No reviews, no history. Just a new email and the same 3 blurry photos. Sometimes I think that cabin isn't a place. It's a trap that keeps changing names, but is always waiting for those who think going to the mountains means disconnecting. And up there in the Rockies, among the pines without signal, there's someone who never stops watching. My name is Luis Hernandez. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a freelance web designer. I've never been superstitious or easily scared. I've slept in empty houses, driven at dawn on unlit highways, and once even had to keep watch all night in an abandoned warehouse for a job. But what happened to me in Big Sur 2 years ago changed how I understand certain things. This isn't about a ghost or anything impossible. It's a real story, and what makes it disturbing is precisely that it could happen to anyone. At the end of summer 2022, someone I hadn't seen since high school reached out to me on Instagram. His name is Angel Guzman. We'd been distant friends, nothing deep, but it surprised me that he contacted me after so long. He said he found out I worked for myself and was looking for someone trustworthy to watch a cabin he rented out in the upper Big Sur area, near the Ventana Wilderness. His family had owned properties up there for years. The proposal was simple. Spend 3 nights, Friday through Monday, watching the property while he and his wife went on a retreat. In exchange, he offered decent money, meals included, internet access, and the weekend free to work from there or rest. Just one condition he told me when we talked on the phone. Well, 2 actually. First, don't go out at night even if you hear noises. The forest swallows sound, it could be anything, but don't get involved, okay? And second, don't touch the back area. It's the backyard, a wooded part. It has no lights or cameras. It's fenced off, but if you feel like exploring, better not even think about it. I laughed. It seemed more like a warning for city tourists than anything serious. What's back there? Nothing important, just promise me. I accepted. I arrived on a Friday afternoon. The cabin was beautiful treated wood, 2 stories, a small window facing the forest, a fireplace, and a modern kitchen. The backyard was marked off with a rusty metal fence about 50 feet behind the house. There were tall bushes, an old fallen antenna, and a kind of toolbox thrown next to a dead tree. It didn't seem like anything special. Angel left me the keys and took off. I was alone. The first night was peaceful. I made coffee, worked on my laptop for a while, and went to sleep early. But around 2:40 in the morning, something woke me up. A dull noise, like someone walking in the backyard. Not normal footsteps, more like someone dragging their feet over fallen leaves. I got up without turning on lights and looked out the upstairs window. Everything was dark, I couldn't see anything. But the sound continued. Slow steps, dirt moving, then a click like someone opening something metallic. It lasted about 5 minutes, then stopped. I didn't see anything, there were no lights back there. I convinced myself it could be an animal, a fox, a raccoon, whatever. I went back to sleep. The second night was worse. I heard the footsteps again, but this time they were faster, more nervous. And worse, someone was breathing. I can't explain it, but it was a clear sound, harsh, like an agitated person. I looked out the upstairs window with a flashlight, careful not to point it directly. I saw the terrain, and in the middle of the darkness, for barely 2 seconds, something moved behind the dead tree. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a shadow. It was a person. I crouched down, my heart pounding. I told myself I didn't have to go out, that Angel had been clear. Don't go out at night. So I didn't. I stayed still until dawn. When I went out in the morning, I went to the backyard. The metal fence had its chain cut, and at the foot of the dead tree, the ground was disturbed as if someone had been digging with their hands or a small shovel. There was nothing visible, just loose dirt. Curiosity was killing me, and that's when I broke my promise. I went to the kitchen, took a shovel that was leaning next to the water heater, and started digging. I didn't have to go very deep. About a foot down, my shovel hit something hard. I dug carefully. It was a plastic container sealed with gray tape. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside was a grocery bag, and inside that, a handful of personal items. A gold chain with a cross pendant, a sealed envelope with a label that said Rosalia D. June 2021, a USB drive, a folded notebook. None of it rang a bell. I didn't understand what was buried there. I checked the notebook. The first pages were medical prescriptions, then lists of names and dates, some crossed out, others with phone numbers. But one page made me stop cold. Don't take it out of the ground. If they find it, they look for it. If they look for it, they come back. They already came for Anna. They're going to come for me. The handwriting was rushed, as if written in fear. The last lines were stained with something brown, not blood, but something dry like mud or wet dirt. I froze. I put everything back, closed the container, buried it again, covered the dirt, and walked back to the cabin. That's when I heard something behind me, a click, the same metallic sound from the night before. I turned around. The dead tree was swaying slightly, but there was no wind. That third night, I didn't sleep. I turned off all lights, locked myself in with a kitchen knife next to the door. At exactly 2 a.m., it started. Footsteps, breathing, and then something new, soft knocks on the back wall. As if someone knew exactly where the box was, as if they knew I had touched it. I didn't call the police. I didn't know what to tell them. That someone came every dawn to dig up a package that even the owner didn't want to talk about. I held out. At 3:20, the sound stopped. I didn't see anything, but at dawn, on the glass of the back door, someone had written with their finger, "That wasn't your name." Angel returned that Monday. I told him almost everything, said someone had entered the property, that they dug, that there were things buried. I didn't tell him I'd taken them out. His face changed. He wasn't surprised, wasn't scared. He just said, "I told you not to touch the backyard." "Who is Rosalia D?" I asked. He took a while to answer. "She was a tenant 2 years ago, left without warning, never picked up her things. The police came, yes, but found nothing strange. Some say she simply went abroad. But she buried things on your property, personal things. She wasn't the only one. This cabin has had different visitors. I never went back to Big Sur. I didn't charge Angel. I didn't ask for explanations. And since then, I don't accept house-sitting jobs. But sometimes in the early morning hours, I wake up for no reason, and for a few seconds, I swear I hear the same thing as that last night. Breathing, footsteps, and dirt moving. Maybe they're still looking for me. Or maybe someone else found what I reburied, and now it's their turn to be the second guest. My name is Daniel Zuniga. I'm 31 years old, and I'm not the type of person who usually gets into trouble. I work as a freelance editor, spend most of the day in front of the computer, and my only adventures tend to be in the form of badly dubbed series or crime novels that help me kill insomnia. But a year and a half ago, something happened to me that I still find hard to explain clearly. Something that changed me and partly ended up breaking a relationship that was already struggling. It all started with a getaway, one of those ideas born more out of obligation than desire. A cabin in the Marquesas Islands, a weekend to fix things with my girlfriend Elena. She proposed the plan, I just said yes. In retrospect, I should have opposed it from the beginning. The cabin was farther than we thought. When the owner sent us the location via WhatsApp, we didn't think much about it. We copied, pasted into Google Maps, and drove without questioning the route. From the city it was slow due to traffic on the highway. By the time we arrived, fog was already falling. Light drizzles accompanied us the last 6 miles. The place was nice. A simple wooden construction with an old fireplace, 2 single beds pushed together to simulate a double, a kitchenette, a rustic bathroom, and a small terrace overlooking a clearing surrounded by tall pines. The owner gave us instructions for turning on the water heater, using the gas stove, and left us an extra water jug just in case. He also told us very seriously that cell signal was poor and electricity could fail if it rained hard. Elena looked at me with annoyance. I just nodded and thanked him. What I wanted was for the weekend to pass quickly because, to be honest, we couldn't stand each other anymore. The tension was there in every silence, in every question that wasn't really a question, in every look of why did we come. I worked too much, and she felt I wasn't present anymore. I thought she'd become distant, cold. We tried everything: therapy, breaks, promises. This was supposedly the last chance to reconnect. And for a few moments, it seemed like it might work, until we noticed the tent. We woke up to the sound of rain hitting the tin roof. It was cold. Elena made instant coffee and buttered toast. While we ate on the terrace, steam from our cups disappeared into the thick fog. That's when I saw it. Was that always there? I asked her. She looked in the direction I was pointing. About 250 feet away, at the edge of the forest, partially visible among the trees, was a dark green tent. Camouflaged, almost invisible unless you looked carefully. It had no brand or any sign, but it was clearly recent. The grass around it was trampled, and there was something hanging from a rope between 2 trees, clothes maybe. "Isn't this area supposed to be closed?" Elena asked. "That's what the owner said. Nobody else rents nearby. Then who's camping there?" We didn't know and didn't want to find out at that moment. During the day, we tried to ignore it. We played cards, cooked something simple, even tried to talk about other things. But we knew someone was there, watching without approaching, without introducing themselves. Every so often we'd look toward the forest, and the tent was still there, quiet, intact, like a silent threat. It started raining harder. Cell signal disappeared completely. We tried sending messages, sharing our location, nothing. The wind hit the windows, and some drops filtered through the roof. We lit the fireplace. Elena lit a candle. That's when she noticed. There's a can of tuna missing. I laughed, thinking she was joking. Maybe we used it yesterday. No, I brought 3. There are 2. We went to the small pantry, and not only was the can of tuna missing, so was a package of crackers and 2 bottles of water. Neither of us had touched them. It wasn't about forgetting something. Someone had taken them. We looked at the door, the windows, the locks. They weren't forced. Everything was still closed. How did they get in? When? From where? Elena no longer had doubts. They've been watching us since yesterday. It doesn't make sense. What would they gain by stealing crackers? It's not what they took, Daniel. It's what they want us to notice. They're marking us. That night we didn't sleep. Every noise was a sign, footsteps among branches, a soft knock on the back wall, broken branches, a slight creak like metal. I armed myself with a thick log from the fireplace. Elena stayed by the door with a kitchen knife. We turned off the lights and watched in silence from the window, covered by darkness. Then we saw the flashlight, a small flash moving among the trees. Not directly toward us, not aggressive, just present. Moving slowly from side to side, as if it knew we were watching, as if it were playing with that. As soon as dawn broke, we took our things and ran to the car. It was still raining, though with less force. Wet backpacks, half-closed clothes, swollen eyes. We got in, I locked it, turned the key. Nothing. I tried again. The engine turned over but didn't start. Once more, nothing. I opened the hood, checked the basics. I'm no mechanic, but I didn't see anything wrong. Until I saw the cables cut cleanly, as if with pliers. Someone had done it with time, with care, with intention. We ran back to the cabin, closed the door, and this time the tent was gone. There was no trace that anyone had camped there. Nothing, not the rope, not the footprints, not the tent. The clearing was clean, the grass intact. We spent almost the entire day trapped, no signal, no car, no more food than 2 packets of instant soup. We tried walking out, but we couldn't remember the way back to the road well. Everything looked the same, trees, rocks, mud. And as we walked, we started seeing signs. Branches tied in the shape of crosses, old clothes hanging from pines, empty bottles stacked like markers, like warnings or like traces. We returned to the cabin at dusk, defeated. Elena cried silently while I blocked the windows with whatever I found. For the first time since we arrived, I saw real fear in her eyes, not anger, not disappointment. Fear. Then, when it was almost dark, we heard the footsteps. Very slow, right outside, circling the cabin. They didn't knock, didn't speak, just walked, and they knew exactly where we were. When the lights came back and the rain stopped, a couple of hikers passed near the cabin. We shouted to them. They helped us push the car to a slope where it miraculously started. We didn't say anything. We didn't talk about the watcher. We didn't mention the cut cables or the stolen things or the footsteps. We just left. Elena and I ended the relationship 2 weeks later. Not because of a fight, not because of infidelity, because of silence. Because neither of us knew how to talk about what happened. I never went back to the Marquesas. And sometimes when it rains hard at night, I wake up thinking someone is walking outside my window. That they left the tent for a few hours. That they're waiting for me to see them. And if one day the tent appears again, I don't plan to stay to see who lives there. My name is Daniela Rosels, and what I'm going to tell you isn't meant to scare anyone. I'm doing this because something very strange happened in that cabin. Something neither my boyfriend nor I can fully understand. I hope this serves to prevent someone else from ending up like the person who wrote that notebook. It all started when we decided to leave Mexico City for a few days. It was February, the season when Val de Bravo is still quiet before the Easter tourists arrive. Marcus, my boyfriend, had a few days off, and I could work from anywhere as long as I had good signal. We found a cabin on an internet rental site. It wasn't in the center of Val, but about 20 minutes by car, going up a steep path near an area called El Edo. It was one of those cabins surrounded by tall pines, with a smell of damp earth that seeped into your bones. I loved it. Marcus didn't say anything, but from the moment we arrived, I noticed he was uneasy. Maybe it was the silence, sometimes, that weighs more than noise. The cabin had the basics: a double bed, a small gas stove, a fireplace with damp wood that wouldn't light well, and a bathroom that smelled like old pipes. But it served its purpose. What caught my attention was a small room at the back, closed with a swollen wooden door. When we gave the keys to the owner, we asked what it was. "A storage room, nothing important," he said. "Don't open it, please." We didn't think much of it. We left our things and went for a walk. The forest was dense, and even though it was early, it seemed to get dark faster among those trees. On the way back to the cabin, I felt watched. Marcus walked ahead, distracted with his phone, but I couldn't stop looking toward the sides of the path. It was as if someone, was hiding among the trunks. That night we cooked something quick and went to bed early. Cell signal was intermittent, and the Wi-Fi, although they said there was some, didn't work for anything. There was no television, and when the lights went out for a few seconds, the silence became so thick I could barely breathe. It was the next day that I found the notebook. It was in the bedroom closet, behind a loose board. I took it out because a slight separation between the wood caught my attention, as if someone had placed it there on purpose. The notebook was one of those school spiral ones with a black cover. It had moisture stains and corners chewed by time. It had no name, but on the first page, someone had written in blue ink, "If you're reading this, get out of here while you can." At first, I thought it was a joke, but then I kept reading. I arrived at this cabin 5 days ago. I rented it to finish a photography project, but something isn't right. From the first night, I felt someone watching me from outside. I thought it was my imagination until I found footprints near the window. They weren't from an animal, they were from someone barefoot. They keep appearing every morning. I turned page after page, without realizing the afternoon had slipped away. Marcus came into the room and found me with the notebook in my hands. "What's that?" It was here. "It's from someone who stayed before us. It says strange things." "Strange how?" I showed him a couple of entries. Some were almost desperate. "Today I saw someone among the trees. They didn't move, just stood there. When I went out to look, they were gone, but when I came back, there were marks in the dirt, as if someone had dragged themselves. I hear noises at night. Not animals, like someone walking on the roof. Today I tried to open the back door. It's locked from the inside. I think someone was there. I can't explain it, but I heard breathing." Marcus laughed. He said it was probably part of a story, or that some guest had left a little gift to scare the next ones. But I didn't laugh. I don't know if it was the way it was written, or how you could see the notebook's deterioration, but something told me it was real. That night I didn't sleep well. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something like footsteps on dry leaves. I woke Marcus. "There's someone outside," I told him quietly. He got up annoyed, opened the curtain abruptly. Nothing, just darkness. But the footsteps continued. "It must be a deer or an opossum," he said. "There are many here." I knew they weren't animal footsteps. There was a rhythm, a weight. In the morning, before breakfast, I went out to check around the cabin. I found marks, not complete footprints, but elongated marks as if something had been dragged. I also found a recent cigarette butt. Neither of us smokes. Marcus was starting to get uncomfortable too, although he wouldn't say it. That afternoon we decided to check the back door, the one the owner had asked us not to open. We tried with a knife, and then with an improvised crowbar. The wood gave way after several attempts, and the latch fell to the floor with a dry thud. The room was small, barely an old table, a broken chair, and in the back, a video camera mounted on a tripod. There was no electricity in that room, so the camera had an external battery connected, though dead. Next to it were more notebooks similar to the one I found. Someone had been documenting something. Everything smelled like confinement. Among the notes, one said, "The camera records at night. There's no one during the day, but at night, yes. Someone enters. I haven't seen them, but they leave things. Small things like signals. Yesterday, they left a lock of hair." That same night, Marcus decided we'd leave the next day. I didn't sleep. Every sound startled me. Around 3 a.m, the main door creaked. It didn't open, just creaked. I approached silently, looked through the crack. Nothing. But when I returned to the room, I noticed something was on the bed. It was the notebook, open to a page I hadn't read. Today they told me they're not going to let me leave anymore, that the cabin belongs to them, that every time someone comes, they have to stay. They say everyone who reads this is already inside, that there's no way out. I screamed at Marcus to grab his things. I told him we couldn't wait until morning. We went down in darkness through the path, with fog covering our vision. The car barely started. When it finally turned over, we didn't look back. When we got to the city, we tried to contact the cabin owner. The listing was gone. The number he gave us didn't exist. The photos of the place disappeared from the platform. Since then, we both dream about that cabin. About the notebook pages we never finished reading. Sometimes I think we didn't really leave. That something from us stayed up there. That's why I'm writing this. Because if you ever decide to rent a cabin near El Herito in Val de Bravo and find a black notebook hidden among the boards, don't read it. Don't open it. Don't follow it. Because if you do, maybe you'll also start hearing footsteps outside. And when that happens, it'll be too late. My name is Marcus. I'm 23 years old, and I work as a delivery driver for one of those apps that send you everything from pastor tacos to refrigerators. I've been doing this for 2 years, mainly because I didn't finish high school, and honestly, what I earn per day helps me support my mom and pay for the room where I live in East Austin. I don't complain. I like being on the street, seeing people, moving around. But what happened to me 6 months ago still makes me nauseous, not so much from fear as from helplessness. That afternoon, I didn't have many orders. It was a Thursday, almost 6 o'clock, when I got a weird notification from the app. Special delivery 18,802. Confidential. The first thing I thought was it was a joke, but when I clicked, everything looked normal. Only the delivery location was far away, a cabin in the forest beyond Cedar Park, way out in the hill country. And the strangest part, it wasn't food, pharmacy, or groceries. It just said, "Pick up package at 1247 Oak Street, Austin. Deliver without opening. Don't ask questions." I had my motorcycle somewhat beaten up those days, so I was using the white Chevy that belonged to my dad before diabetes took him. I said, "Okay, $1,000 for one delivery, cash." I confirmed, and within 10 minutes I was at Oak Street. It was an old house, one of those that have been kind of absorbed by modern businesses, like the city had left them forgotten. I got out of the car, rang the doorbell, and a lady came out, about 60, gray hair well combed, dressed all in black. She didn't say a single word. She gave me a wooden box, not very big, like one of those cigar boxes but taller. It weighed little, was well sealed with a red ribbon. I tried to ask, "Does this need to be delivered today?" But the lady just closed the door without answering. I got in the car, put the box in the back, and entered the location in GPS. 3.5 hours of driving, pure forest, curves, and not a single gas station after the last Exxon in Dripping Springs. I stopped there for water, gas, and some chips. I thought maybe it was one of those romantic deliveries. You know, anniversary surprise or some rich people's weird thing. After Dripping Springs, the road became a maze of trees and fog. It started getting dark, and I was getting nervous, but the pay was worth it. The location took me to a dirt road detour where not even God passed. I advanced like 3 miles between mud, stones, and roots, and at the end, right where GPS said, "You have arrived at your destination," was a solitary cabin. Old but well built. No lights, no cars, no sign of cell signal. I got out with the box, knocked on the wooden door, waited. Nobody. I walked around to the back, nothing. Closed windows, I shouted good afternoon. In case someone was inside, total silence. I went back to the car to wait a few minutes, but 20 passed and nobody appeared. I thought about leaving the box at the door, taking a photo and leaving. But something made me doubt. I don't know if it was what the app said or the place itself, but I went back to the car with the box to the passenger seat. I decided to get out of there. I put in the key, turned it, the car wouldn't start. I tried again, nothing. The dashboard lit up, but the engine barely made an attempt. I popped the hood, checked what little I knew, battery, oil, hoses. Everything seemed fine, but the car simply wouldn't respond. And that's where the really ugly part started. I tried calling on my phone, zero signal. Not even to send a message. I walked a few yards looking for higher ground, but the forest was so thick you could barely see the sky. I went back to the car, told myself, I'll wait a bit, and if nobody comes, I'll walk until I find signal. It started getting cold. The forest sounds became more intense, branches creaking, birds suddenly going quiet, something moving in the bushes. And there I was with a mysterious box and a car that didn't want to start. The shadows stretched out like the sun was falling straight down. Almost at 8, I heard something soft, slow footsteps on dry leaves. I looked out the car window. At first, I didn't see anything. But then, at the end of the trail where I'd come from, there was a tall figure in black, standing completely still. It didn't move, but it was there. I said quietly, "Hello." The figure didn't respond. I locked the car doors. It scared me, yes, but more than anything, it gave me that feeling that something doesn't fit, like when you know a puzzle piece isn't in the right place. The figure stood there for a few seconds, then slowly backed away toward the forest. It didn't run, just walked away step by step until it disappeared among the trees. I had my heart racing. I grabbed the box, opened the glove compartment, and took out a small knife I used to open packages. I held it in my hand, hesitating whether I should open the box, but I remembered the instruction, "Don't open." And for some reason, I was more scared of what I might find inside than what was outside. More than an hour passed, nobody, nothing, total darkness. The forest seemed to swallow time. Suddenly, a flashlight in the distance, coming down the path. I ran to turn on the car lights, the hazard lights. Whoever it was needed help, but the flashlight went out as if whoever was carrying it had stopped. Then I heard a loud thud on the back of the car. I got out as I could, turning with the knife in hand. Nobody there. I ran to the driver's seat, locked everything again. I was breathing so hard my chest hurt. That's when the box started making a very low noise, like something moving inside. I pushed it to the car floor. I didn't open it. I didn't want to. I couldn't. I spent the night awake. Nobody came. At 6 in the morning, as soon as some light came in, I tried the car again. This time it started like nothing had happened. I left there like crazy, without looking back. I delivered the box at the app's central office in Austin. I said the recipient wasn't there, that there was a problem. Nobody asked for explanations. They paid me the $800 in cash. I never found out what was in the box. 2 weeks later, I got a new notification from the app. Special delivery, $500, confidential. Same format, different address. I didn't accept it. But since then, sometimes I think I see that figure standing among the trees, right before it gets dark. It doesn't move, just watches. And every time I accept a new delivery, I can't help thinking if it'll be another trap. Or worse, if at some point, I was the real package. After that delivery, I took a few days off. I didn't tell my mom or my work buddies anything. Honestly, I didn't even know how to explain what happened without sounding paranoid. I just said the car had broken down in the mountains, half a lie. I took it to a mechanic in South Austin. He checked it completely, spark plugs, alternator, battery. Everything was fine. He told me sometimes in very humid areas, sensors fail, that it wasn't anything serious. But I knew the car had started again, like nothing happened. As if someone or something had left, it stranded on purpose. I went back to work normally, short orders within the city. Nothing that would take me too far. A few days later, I met Ruben, a guy who started new with the app. He was about 28, skinny, kind of nervous. Talking one day while we waited for orders outside a butcher shop in South Austin, I mentioned the special deliveries. "Have you gotten those?" I asked, testing the waters, and his face changed. "You too?" I asked him to tell me. He said he accepted one a month ago. He had to take a box to an old ranch in Bastrop. Same thing, nobody there, no signal, car died, and he was trapped for several hours. He also heard footsteps, lights that went out, and the same thing, the box. He never knew what it had. Since then, I don't do deliveries outside I-35, he told me. Seriously, it was. That's when I understood that mine hadn't been an isolated event. There was something more, like there was a hidden network of orders that nobody monitored. I started paying more attention to delivery driver forums. Some told similar stories, but always between the lines, like they were afraid of sounding ridiculous. Almost nobody said it directly. deliveries that didn't appear later in the history, client names that never responded, addresses in towns without inhabitants, closed boxes with colored seals. And then another notification came. This time I didn't accept it, but it wasn't the only detail. In the app's message box, something appeared that I'd never seen, a direct message signed by Private Operations. It said, "Marcus Vasquez, your profile has been selected for high-trust routes. Contact 512 XXX. That wasn't normal. I talked to Ruben, showed him the message. He said he'd gotten one too, but ignored it. Then we decided to do something. We wanted to know what was behind these deliveries, not out of morbid curiosity, but because we knew sooner or later someone was going to get into something serious. Ruben had a sister who worked at a tech company. He asked her for help to trace the address of a delivery that came to him days later. It was in a small town near Lockhart. He pretended to accept it, but without doing it. His sister tracked the client's IP. It turned out to be a private network that bounced from different states, as if they were hiding their origin. The box this time he did open it. He showed it to me at his house, with gloves and everything like it was a bomb. Inside was a notebook with names and dates. Real names, missing people. Names we later looked up on Google. They all had something in common. They'd been reported missing in rural areas. Recent dates. One page just said, released 2/24. And another had written, delivered without incident. What if they're not sending objects, Ruben told me, and if they're using the app to move information or people? I went cold. We thought about reporting it, but to whom? The police. What if they were involved? What if the app itself was just a front for something else? One afternoon, Ruben disappeared. He called me around 5 to tell me he was heading to a delivery at a ranch near Lockhart. It sounded normal, but he never responded after that. I went looking for him, used his phone's GPS that was linked to the app. I found it parked halfway next to a rusty fence. His car was locked, the box still in the seat. There was no signal. I shouted his name for half an hour, no answer. I went back to the car, opened the box. This time there was no notebook, just a photo. It was Ruben, tied up with a blindfold, inside what looked like a shed. I drove back to Austin like crazy, went to his sister, showed her the photo. She started crying. We decided not to go to the police. We were afraid they wouldn't do anything, or worse, that it would put him in more danger. That's when we went deep. We used her system access to track all the special orders from the app in recent weeks. We discovered there weren't many, but they were all the same rural areas without signal, nameless senders, mysterious boxes. A pattern was starting to take shape. All deliveries were made within no more than 50 miles of Austin, always with different drivers, but some repeated. I was one. Ruben 2. 5 other names matched. One of them, when I looked him up on social media, appeared as missing since November. That's when I understood something else. They weren't choosing randomly. They were testing us. They were seeing how far we'd go, who asked questions, who obeyed without asking. And Ruben had stepped out of the script. Today, it's been 2 months since I know nothing about him. Sometimes I think I see him among people, on a street corner downtown, in a parked car, but it's always someone else. The app keeps sending me normal orders, but among them, from time to time, a special one. I always ignore them. One night when I got home, I found an envelope under my door. Inside was a folded sheet in four. It just said, "We know you opened the box." I haven't slept well since. I thought about leaving, changing states, but every time I try to get away, something pulls me back. The app won't let me close my account. There's no option. I sent emails, nobody answers. I went to the offices, they closed weeks ago, but notifications keep coming. Today I got a new special delivery. No payment, confidential, urgent, to the same cabin in the forest. That one I already know. The one I somehow never could completely leave. And for some reason I don't understand. I'm considering accepting it. My name is Ernesto Rivera, but in the mountains they know me as Windwalker. I've been a mountain guide for more than 20 years. I've climbed up and down almost the entire Sierra Nevada range, from the canyons near Bishop to the peaks of the eastern Sierra. I've led large groups, school kids, foreigners, and even military personnel who needed training for difficult conditions. But what happened to me in October 2021, I'll never forget. It wasn't because of a storm or an accident. It was because of something I never expected to find in the mountains, human traps designed to hurt or kill. The story I'm about to tell occurred in the Sequoia National Forest area, a dense zone of pines and ravines where fog is thick and silence seems to have weight. That time it wasn't a common excursion. I'd been hired privately by a lone client who introduced himself as Ramiro. Ramiro was about 40, thin-build, sunken eyes. He wasn't very talkative, but he knew what he wanted, a 3-day hike through a rarely traveled route, sleeping in an old abandoned cabin he'd located by satellite. He paid me in cash up front and brought his own equipment, all new but without visible brands. That seemed strange to me, but in this job, you learn not to ask too many questions if the money is good, and the client doesn't seem dangerous. We left on a Thursday morning from the lodgepole area with backpacks on our shoulders. We walked almost 7 hours until we reached the cabin. It was an old wooden structure, one of those used by loggers decades ago. It was more or less standing, with rotting walls and a rusty tin roof, but it served for sleeping. We spent the first night there. I lit a fire outside, boiled coffee, and dedicated myself to checking the perimeter like I always do. I like to make sure there are no animals nearby or signs of people. That day, everything seemed normal. On the second day, something started to feel wrong. It was in the morning when we went out to explore a trail east of the cabin. We walked about 300 feet among the pines when Ramiro suddenly stopped and asked me to stay still. He pointed to the ground where there was a rope half buried in the fallen leaves. Moving it with a stick, we discovered it was connected to a homemade trap, a kind of rusty blade tied to a bent branch, ready to launch like a guillotine at leg level. It wasn't improvised. Someone had taken the time to camouflage it well. "What is this?" Ramiro asked, his voice tense. "A trap," I told him, "but not for animals. This is for people." We looked at each other. There were no signs of recent footprints, but the trap hadn't been there long. We decided to return to the cabin. On the way back, we found another one. This time it was a pit covered with branches, with sharp nails at the bottom. It was barely distinguishable. The camouflaged cover was dangerous, and it was just 30 feet from where we'd slept. That night we didn't light a fire. I slept with my machete at hand and Ramiro with a knife hanging from his neck. We didn't say much. He seemed worried but not surprised. The third morning woke us with a dry sound, like someone had stepped on a very thick branch nearby. I went out slowly and found something more disturbing than any trap. A branch in the shape of a cross tied with rusty wire, stuck in front of the cabin entrance. I went back in and told Ramiro we had to leave immediately, no breakfast, no checking anything else. He didn't argue. But while we packed our things, I noticed something. His backpack had a false bottom. I'm not curious by nature, but when he went to the stream to wash up, I checked. There were maps, aerial photos, and a notebook with coordinates written by hand. I also saw something that froze my blood, a photo of the same cabin, but with a group of people standing in front of it. They looked blurry, as if it had been taken from a distance. Everyone wore civilian clothes, but one carried a radio hanging from his belt. When he came back, I confronted him directly. "What did you come looking for here?" He looked at me without answering, then said, "I had to confirm something. I already did. Let's go." And that's what we did. The walk back was tense. Neither of us talked, and I couldn't stop thinking about the traps, the cross, that photo. Halfway there, while crossing a narrow canyon, we heard a noise among the trees. It wasn't an animal. I know because it moved carefully, like someone who doesn't want to be heard. We didn't run, but we did pick up the pace. I went ahead, Ramiro behind. When we reached the main trail where I'd left the vehicle, I saw someone had scratched the hood with something sharp. 3 letters, BLT. I don't know what they meant. I don't want to know. Ramiro paid me double what we'd agreed and asked me to forget everything. I never heard from him again. But since then, I stopped accepting private excursions. I don't care if they pay well or if they bring their own equipment. I won't go up again without knowing exactly who's hiring me and why. The mountains keep secrets, many of them. Some are ancient, others recent. But they all hide well among the trees, in the ravines, in places where people don't want to enter anymore. And sometimes the trap isn't meant to hunt. It's meant to warn. Because in those corners where law no longer reaches, the mountain obeys other owners. And we who think we know the paths are just tolerated visitors until we stop being so. When I returned to Bishop, I had coffee at Doña Aloysa's diner like I always do after an excursion. She noticed I was quieter than usual, but didn't ask. She serves strong coffee and leaves you alone if she sees you need it. That night I didn't sleep. It wasn't from fear, but from the uneasiness of not knowing what I'd gotten into. It's very different when you face the mountain, a fall, a snake, even a mountain lion. All of that I understand. It's part of the deal. But this was something else. It was something human, calculated, and most ugly of all, deliberately hidden. A few days later, I went back to check my GPS. I keep the routes in an old notebook and also on the device. When I opened the records, I noticed Ramiro had marked at least 4 more coordinates than the ones we used, all within about 6 miles around the cabin. That is, he had planned to explore more. He'd prepared that route beforehand in detail. He knew what he was looking for. I didn't want to go back alone, but I also couldn't stay with the doubt. So a week later, I went with Victor, an old friend who's also a guide but dedicates himself more to forestry work. I told him the basics, that I'd found human traps and wanted to understand what the hell was happening in that area. He accepted, but made me promise we wouldn't do anything stupid, that if we saw something weird, we'd leave without thinking about it. We left early, armed with machetes, supplies for 2 days, and a long-range radio. We left the vehicle farther away this time as a precaution. When we got to the cabin, there were no recent signs. Everything was the same, but you could tell someone had been around in the days following my departure. We found an empty can of tuna with an expiration date from the previous month. Also cigarette remains and a fresh mark on one of the trees. 2 cuts in a cross, like those some used to mark clandestine routes. We decided to look for the other coordinates. The first took us to a clearing among tall pines. The strange thing was that the center of the clearing had an old fire with stones placed in a circle and a couple of long, charred bones. They weren't from cattle or deer, at least not the ones I'm used to seeing. They were thinner, and one seemed to have been cut with a tool. We didn't say anything, just covered them with dirt and continued. The second coordinate took us to a hillside. There we found the strangest thing of all, a kind of shack made with black tarps, branches, and plastic bags. It wasn't inhabited, but it had clothes inside, expired food, and a notebook with hand-drawn pictures. Drawings of people with crossed-out eyes, houses on fire, and what seemed to be a map, though poorly made, with arrows and marked points. On the back of one page, it said in red ink, "Don't go up anymore." That day we decided not to sleep in the cabin. We moved north to the edge of a stream and camped there. That night around 2 a.m, we heard a loud noise among the trees. Something big was moving, but not like an animal. It was like someone was dragging a thick branch. We put out the fire and stayed silent. The noise stopped near our tent. We could smell cigarette smoke. We hadn't lit any. The next morning when we went out, there were fresh human footprints, big boots with thick soles. 2 pairs. The prints circled our campsite as if they'd been surrounding us for hours. We packed and left without breakfast. We didn't talk much on the way. There was nothing to say. We knew what we'd seen. Days later, back in town, Victor confessed something to me. He told me that a couple of years ago, when he was with a surveying crew, they found an area about 12 miles from there where there were signs of suspicious movement. Buried barrels, roads erased with branches, trees marked with old paint. They'd reported to the municipality, but nobody did anything. "It's not an area we touch," they told him. "It's better to leave it as is." And now I think Ramiro wasn't a tourist or mountaineer. He didn't carry a camera, didn't stop to admire landscapes. He had the eyes of someone who'd already seen too many things and was looking for something else. Maybe he was a journalist, maybe an investigator, maybe something worse. Maybe they sent him to look for land that no longer belongs to anyone, or that belongs to someone who shouldn't have it. Since then, I changed how I work. I no longer accept just anyone, only acquaintances or large groups. And I never go back to that area, not even for double pay. Because it's no longer virgin land. It's marked land. And in the mountains, when land is marked, it's because someone claims it. And they don't do it with property titles. They do it with traps, wire crosses, and silent footsteps in the night. I'm just a guide, and I learned there are paths it's better to forget, even if you know them by heart. My name is Marcus, and what I'm about to tell you happened many years ago when I was about 32 years old. It was mid-August. I remember it vividly. And I had taken some vacation days from my auto shop. So I decided to visit my aunt and uncle who lived in a small town called Cedar Falls in northern Minnesota. I had spent my entire childhood there. My grandparents were my guardians until I was 12, so you can imagine how much I loved them and how much that place meant to me. My grandparents had both passed away several years earlier, but I never forgot about them. That day I arrived in town, I spent time with family, and it got too late to visit the cemetery. The next day I woke up early, helped my uncle with some yard work, and in the afternoon I planned to go to Eternal Rest Cemetery. I had brought some old photographs of my grandparents from when they were still alive, along with some fresh sunflowers that I wanted to leave at their shared headstone. They were buried together in the town cemetery, about 15 minutes away by motorcycle. I left around 6:45 in the evening, but between getting the bike started and stopping to buy a memorial candle, it was getting close to sunset. It was about 7:20 when I arrived. I remember the sky was already losing its light. That deep blue, almost gray tone that announces darkness is coming. I was parking a few yards before the cemetery entrance when suddenly I saw an elderly woman who looked strangely familiar. She was crossing the street, walking calmly, heading straight toward the cemetery gates. That woman was my grandmother. She entered the cemetery as if she were still alive. But that couldn't be possible. She had died 5 years earlier. But it was her. I recognized her completely, the way she walked, her silver hair in a bun, even the blue floral dress she always wore to church. I didn't think, didn't react. I just went blank. I turned off the motorcycle without saying a word and followed her inside. I searched for her, calling out loudly, "Grandma, Grandma Rose." But she was nowhere to be found. I walked among the headstones and monuments, searching everywhere. I approached a groundskeeper who was watering some flower beds and asked if he had seen an elderly woman enter. "No, son, nobody else came in except you," he told me. I kept walking until I reached my grandparents' graves. I ran my fingers over the headstone, traced their names carved in the granite, and whispered, "Thank you for letting me see you one more time, Grandma." I took out the sunflowers and arranged them as best I could, then pulled out the photographs I had brought. Some were family pictures. Others were older ones from their youth. I placed them on the grave with a small stone on top so they wouldn't blow away. And there, while I was looking at the photographs, I realized something that made my heart stop. In one of the photos, there was my grandmother sitting on the front porch of her house, laughing at something my grandfather had said. She was wearing the exact same blue floral dress I had just seen her in. I didn't say anything. I didn't tell my aunt and uncle about this, or anyone else for that matter. I kept this secret for many years. And today, for the first time, I'm sharing it because I believe there are things in this world that need to be told, even when they have no logical explanation. Some encounters are gifts, brief moments, when love transcends the boundaries between life and death. I worked as a caretaker at Mountain View Cemetery in Colorado Springs for almost 18 years. I did everything from fixing minor plumbing issues and repairing headstones to rebuilding entire sections of cemetery walls. I'm not someone who scares easily, and I don't believe in tall tales. But there was one experience in that place that taught me to have respect for the dead. At that time, I was recently divorced and living alone, so I had to spend some nights in the small caretaker's cottage next to the cemetery entrance. I've always enjoyed peace and quiet, And at night, the cemetery is the most silent place that exists. You only hear crickets, the wind, and occasionally coyotes in the distance. There was one night when I was so restless that I decided to take a walk and read the names and dates on the headstones. I'd been working there for years and had never really done that before. I was out there, reading their names and talking to them as if they were still alive. I don't know if that had anything to do with what happened next, but that same night, something interrupted my peace. It must have been around 3 in the morning when I heard it for the first time. I thought I was dreaming, but I wasn't. I was wide awake. It was a man's voice, praying softly. The voice sounded measured, almost as if he were whispering. I went outside with my flashlight, thinking someone had broken in. It wouldn't be the first time family members snuck in at night to mourn their loved ones. I walked among the graves and noticed the voice was coming from a small, old chapel that stood within the cemetery grounds. The praying continued. I could hear it clearly, but the most disturbing thing was that the chapel was always locked with a heavy padlock. I had the only key and no one else did. Someone was inside that chapel, locked in. "Hello," I shouted toward the building. The voice stopped immediately. I waited, but nothing, just complete silence. I went back to my cottage, somewhat unsettled. Maybe it had been an echo or someone who had already left. The next day I mentioned what had happened. Some people laughed at me. They said I was just tired and I didn't want to insist. But from that night on, the prayers returned, always at the same time. I stopped going outside. I stayed in the cottage with the door locked, listening from inside. Sometimes the prayers lasted 7 minutes, sometimes longer. Always the same voice, always praying the same words. I would turn up the volume on my small television to drown it out. But one night, I gathered my courage, took out my old flip phone, and recorded the audio. I don't know why I did it. Maybe to convince my coworkers that I wasn't losing my mind. The next morning at 8, I put on my headphones and listened to the recording calmly. The voice was crystal clear, as if someone were praying right next to me. That was the strange part. At night, the voice sounded distant, but on the phone it was perfectly clear. But what disturbed me most was the last phrase, "Pray for us, so that someone will hear me." That's not part of any prayer I know. I didn't know whether to delete that recording or show it to someone. In the end, I did neither. I kept the audio file and kept the story to myself. Years passed, and the prayers continued appearing from time to time. I learned to ignore them. I never again tried to find that man or see who was inside that chapel, because as far as I knew, it was always empty. But sometimes, late at night when the wind is still, I wonder if he's still there, still praying, still hoping that someone will hear him. Some voices, I've learned, echo from places deeper than we can understand. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.